Specifically for small business school.
Right side.
But like I said, but they do have the. Judy Miranda's here.
Thanks for your support. Appreciate it, Sonny.
It's the things people want to sometimes.
See the sign in, so,
Yeah, I did it, yeah.
yeah, and I'll have to send you a new Excel sheet because we're over 400.
It's a church that goes in the hospital. They buy it and she did.
Maybe your mom.
All I can do is tie it, quarter so I can.
The church is chicken. That's my what I've done. Stop TV. We got this so much. Yeah.
Thanks.
I'll
have it. Yeah.
There you go. So the presenters on here or something the same.
Get ready to hit a coffee.
Temple Baptist. Yeah. I was kind of wondering about that when I was in. But it was very good. I mean, they got a lot of information. I used the information they got in my talks. The last one that I was in was in Fayetteville State.
He usually put 3 out, so is that gonna be my town? I'll keep my hair down from now on. No more doing my hair. Well, yeah. My son had, James, John, I don't know.
No,
Be social. I like that, Well, that presentation.
Well, I hadn't seen it, but she said based on the numbers that are coming in.
I would love to. It was bad, but it was good. I mean, that's, yeah, that's how. I'm excited about this, but.
I need to sit down and find the time.
Make it a good thing. So each of us have the title. I hear it's supposed to be pretty weather Saturday.
It is.
Yeah, not. You know, the guys come out here, but I'm like, get away from it all.
Hey, Christine, you don't have to move up. We found somebody. Pam script.
I think I said, since I have a building, but this is a big deal.
That's where she come. She said, no, I said, no, don't give me a break. Yeah. Yeah. She's our intern. She's a criminal justice major in social work at UNCP. Did you get some information? What's your sign credit hours?
I'm like,
Thank you for joining in. Of course.
Sweet, it's special.
much time do we have?
Do you see the vending machine?
We have a turnout. We have a turnout.
But you know, I'm at odds with you. Skip me, but you don't look a girl that you.
I want to make sure everything's okay here. So we have a green room where you can relax.
I just sat here with school when I could.
You know what? So he's going to talk to you about your PowerPoint, and I'll take it to the green room.
Yeah, you do. It's got to share some of the information.
We'll see, then I go back and get.
Okay. Slowing down. Yeah,
Sure.
yeah, I'm looking for traffic.
So that way, when
You
you go
going
into
also
the.
to do that, I'm counting the
Well,
days.
that's what I'm gonna say.
I was talking to
It
Mario.
might be.
But you're not retired.
I'm stepping down, we're gonna retire in 2 years.
That way we got to cover both sides.
We have over 400 people registered.
I have to recalculate, I have to re.
Well, even
Just
just
like
sharing
in Europe.
is doing weekends too, as you know.
It's coming, a lot of our students, and then what you're gonna see is a lot of students coming in and out.
Yeah. I'd say, was it 03?
No, I started in '04.
Okay, you were.
Joey?
Yeah, but,
Joey Haynes?
yeah, you can't retire just
He's
yet.
from H21.
Oh, okay, great.
Alex, great.
2
Joey?
years old. I think I could do too.
Yeah, that's.
So Joey. Waters, bathroom, private bathroom, same as, okay, house is here. And then we'll spend that. Yes. I had here, but I don't know where it went. Oh, it went up here. So I turned it up, we just tried to turn it back.
Yeah, I know we promoted it a lot on our ends.
You may all want to turn off your cell phones just for the presentations because they're being recorded and they'll all be emailed to you as soon as it's processed. He's just gonna make sure the mic is on. And then you're ready to start.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to UNCP. My name is Diane Prusank, and I'm the Provost and Vice Chancellor here at the university. I want to welcome all of you on behalf of Chancellor Cummings, the faculty, the staff, and the students here at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke to the 8th Annual Human Trafficking Conference. There are about 400 people registered for this conference at this point, which is amazing. The conference is taking place both in person here in the Upchurch Auditorium as well as virtually. We are honored to host our distinguished speakers and all of you attendees as you spend the day grappling with a pervasive and insidious crime that is human trafficking. As a university, we take seriously the prevention of this crime. And we've used this annual convening as a way to elevate attention to human trafficking, to forge connections among scholars and practitioners so that we can join together to prevent this crime. Since 2015, this conference has brought a wide variety of experts to our university to keep our students and the public aware of the dangers. Our school has been honored to hear from members of Congress, state legislators, law enforcement agencies, including the FBI and Homeland Security, the Wilmington Police Department, the New Hanover County Sheriff's Office, the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, and on. We've also heard from members of non-governmental organizations who support and aid survivors. We've heard from members of academia, members of the North Carolina Human Trafficking Commission, the North Carolina Coalition Against Human Trafficking, tribal leaders from across the country, but most importantly, we've heard from survivors of human trafficking, whose contribution to fighting this crime has been the greatest resource of all. Traditionally, our conference has focused attention on the crime of the commercial sexual exploitation of adults and children, which is a continuing crime that needs to be stopped. This year's conference will focus most of its attention on a crime that affects all of us directly, labor trafficking. There are numerous types of labor trafficking, and our speakers will address several of them. Dr. Paparozzi, who has convened all of us here and has done this for years, has given me the honor of allowing you some insight into the day and the speakers who are coming. So I'm going to spend a little time talking about who you will hear from today and their subjects, an amazing group of individuals. Our keynote, Christine Commerce from the Alliance to End Human Trafficking, will speak about labor trafficking from a global perspective and how businesses and consumers contribute to human trafficking on a worldwide scale, down to a very local level. After Ms. Commerce speaks, we will hear from 3 survivors who are subject matter experts on the crime. Sisters Hope, Lloyd, and Alex Herring, who will discuss the overlap between illegal immigration and exploitation. And Latiana Appleberry, a survivor leader and founder of the Survivor Network for North Carolina, will speak about the critical role of survivor leadership in shaping anti-trafficking responses. We will also hear today from the Executive Director of the North Carolina Human Trafficking Commission, Christine Long, who was our keynote speaker in 2022. She will speak about the different types of labor trafficking we see in our state, as well as labor trafficking vulnerabilities in North Carolina. The chair of the North Carolina Coalition Against Human Trafficking and founder of NC Stop Human Trafficking, Pam Strickland, will share about buying fair trade products and its impact on the fight against human trafficking. Pam graciously has a fair trade table set up in the lobby, and I encourage all of you to visit Pam's table. Thank you, Pam. Our next speaker is Bill Wolf, and he has graciously spoken at all of our conferences and was the keynote in 2024. He is the 2018 recipient of the Presidential Award for Extraordinary Efforts to Combat Trafficking in Persons, the founder of Anti-Trafficking International, the former director of human trafficking programs at the Department of Justice, as well as a special advisor to the White House on human trafficking. Joey Hain, the intervention coordinator coordinator from A21's Charlotte Freedom Center, will address us and discuss the types of labor trafficking in the United States, as well as giving us insights into her organization's work. Finally, we are honored to feature one of our own, a UNCP student, Jeremy Hunt. As part of his honors capstone project, Jeremy has written 2 poems for this address that fight missing and murdered Indigenous women, as well as the hidden world of labor trafficking. I'm truly amazed by the level of expertise that is here with us today. We are fortunate to be among all of you. This is a busy year in higher ed. There is a lot happening, and there is a lot of scrutiny and a lot of attention being paid to higher ed, and in a very negative way in some circles. And those of us on our campus and all of our campuses are feeling this. A lot of the portrayals that you will see in the media don't speak to who we really are as higher education institutions and the work that we really do on our campuses. There tend to be a lot of characterizations that don't reflect a regional public university like UNCP and how we do our work. First and foremost, we are here to educate our students. And as a regional public university, we are committed as stewards of our community as well. I have been able this year to attend several functions on our campus, including a health inequities convening, a recent hackathon this weekend. A hackathon, by the way, is not about hacking into people's accounts or anything. I ignorantly made the joke, why do they need funding? Can't they just get it online somewhere? But our students, when they participate in a hackathon, they are looking to solve social problems, real world problems, using technology to positive ends, to collaborate and connect with each other. Last week, we also hosted on our campus our annual conference about Southeast American Indian Studies. And then we have this event here today. So yes, first and foremost, we are here to educate our students in our classrooms and labs in really traditional ways. But we also educate our students in non-traditional ways, this convening being one of them. Institutions of higher education are also, and we have always been, responsible for convening experts, community members, and students to create connections and collaboration to solve real-world problems. That is who we are. It is our obligation as institutions of higher education, and we take this very seriously at UNCP, to elevate important issues of the day, to seek solutions from the best minds and the strongest hearts. I want to personally thank all of you for being here today, for being part of the University of North Carolina at Pembroke, for being part of this convening, and for being part of the solution to this problem. We want to recognize, of course, all of the folks who have helped to contribute to this event today. We start with our Chancellor, Dr. Robin Cummings, the Associate Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, Dr. Ashley Allen, the Chair of the Department of Sociology and Criminal Justice, Dr. John Porter Lillis, and all of the faculty and staff in the Department of Sociology and Criminal Justice, the Administrative Support Associate, Shannon Maynor, the Director of Creative Services, Courtney Powers Walters, and the Technology Support Specialist, James Lewis, and his DoIT staff. I would be remiss not to share our appreciation for Dr. Judy Paparozzi. It is our privilege at UNCP that she serves as a faculty member in our Department of Sociology and Criminal Justice. She has been the absolute driving force behind this conference from its very beginning 8 years ago. Her dedication to this cause is not just a wonderful role model for our students, but a role model for all of us. Thank you. Her work reminds us of what a university needs to be. Thank you all and welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Prusank, and thank you for all who are attending here in person. And also thank you to all of you virtually attending. We just logged in about 410 people. And I know virtual is the way to go anymore, so I'm so happy that you could join us. So welcome to our annual UNCP Human Trafficking Conference. And as Dr. Prusank mentioned, my name is Judy Paparosi, and I'm an adjunct professor of criminal justice here. And I've been here for 18 years, and I'm so honored to be a part of the University of North Carolina at Pembroke and my department, specifically sociology and criminal justice. And as you know, as Dr. Prusank mentioned, this conference started almost 10 years ago, thanks to a student who had an idea. Dr. Paparosi, why aren't you doing conferences? And I said, it's a lot of work. Believe me, it's a lot of work, but thank you so much for attending. And I hope this is as big a learning experience today for you as it always is for me. And we have 3 survivors, and if anyone has taught me about human trafficking, it has been the survivors. The experts are wonderful, their expertise is fabulous, but to really get to the heart of changing and fighting this crime, we're so honored to have survivors here today. So I just can't believe so many people are registered. Now, how many of you saw the movie Sound of Freedom? Okay, so after people saw the movie Sound of Freedom, the one question I kept getting is, what can I do? So that's a hard question to answer. Of course, you can support organizations. You have several here today, NGOs or non-government organizations that you can support. But when I started focusing on labor trafficking in my classes about 6 or 7 years ago, starting with an incredible documentary called The Dark Side of Chocolate, I saw my students change. They finally said to themselves, oh, now I know what I can do. And since our first conference, we've had an expert here, Pam Strickland, who's been at least 3 or 4, and she's spoken at our conference before, but she brings that table because that is slave-free gifts you can buy. Slave-free chocolate, slave-free tea that I think I saw, and many handmade things, but it's great stuff. In fact, the basket where I have in the room, that's slave-free. Whether we know it or not, slavery is in all of our lives. It's on the very equipment that Mr. Gaddy is recording everything. It's in this clicker. It's in our cell phones. It's everywhere. And unless we wake up and realize that child slave labor, which is it's an incredibly large crime. The second largest crime in the world is human trafficking. When I was a prosecutor and worked in the prison system even before that, we never heard of this crime. And that's beginning in like 2003 or 4. No one heard of it. Well, guess who knew about it at the time? Those who survived it. And they brought it to our attention when we were able to discover it. So this is a relatively new crime. But the worst part of this crime that you'll hear from our speakers today is we're partially responsible for it. And that's when I saw my students' passion explode. So before we begin, I'd just like to mention, Dr. Prusank introduced our speakers, but just to tell you why I'm reintroducing them, because there's like a special thing. So beginning with our keynote speaker, Christine Commerce, I heard her talk last year on labor trafficking, and I was floored. She and these 2 women sitting here, the first 2, Hope and Alex, they inspired this year's conference theme. So thank you so much to all 3 of you. Sisters Hope Lloyd and Alex Herring, I heard them speak at a conference. It was actually kind of a fundraising conference, but a small conference, a dinner conference, of a UNCP alumnus, Seth Brooks, who invited them to speak. I was honored to speak at the same time, but he started his own non-governmental organization to help survivors of human trafficking called Project Lost Sheep, right? Yes, and it's based in Reidsville, North Carolina. So one of those students who sat in my class and took this class and learned about it after being deployed, I think in Afghanistan or wherever, he came back to the United States and he was determined to start his own non-governmental organization. I'm so used to saying NGO, his NGO to fight human trafficking. And he had these 2 incredible speakers, and I was just blown away by both of them. We have another survivor who is also a subject matter expert, as they are, a lived experience expert, Latiana Appleberry. She's going to be a little late, but she has an incredible story to share with founding Survivor Network North Carolina, and she empowers others who have survived human trafficking. And then I have three heroes speaking, starting with Pam Strickland, as I already mentioned. Pam opened my eyes to fair trade. She opened my eyes to the fact that we have to also fight this form of labor trafficking. Bill Wolf, who actually worked in the White House and has worked in the Department of Justice, there are no words when I talk about Bill Wolf. In fact, he has gotten me so many of my speakers over the years, and I'm forever grateful to him. And then our own Executive Director of North Carolina's Human Trafficking Commission, Christine Long, she'll be coming in virtually today. She has a busy schedule. She has been at every conference, spoken at several conferences. Keynoted one, as Dr. Prusank mentioned, and she just does the work to make North Carolina safe. And I have a new person on my agenda this year, Joey Hain. And Joey will talk to you about 821 Charlotte Freedom Center, as Dr. Prusank mentioned. And it's a global counter-trafficking nonprofit based out of Charlotte, right? Charlotte, North Carolina. And I'm so excited to hear what Joey has to share about 821 and its work. And finally, I have to say, this is my baby over here. Jeremy is doing his capstone with me, and he wrote 2 poems from a Native American point of view about both sex trafficking and labor trafficking. I'm so proud of you, Jeremy. Thank you so much for being a part of this. So I also want to thank, just real quickly, I hate to do this, my husband. He puts up with me every year doing this. This is almost my 10th year because 1 year was canceled because of COVID. My children, my sisters are always here, Joanna Delamary, my friends, my dear colleagues, Dr. Prusank, Dr. Ashley Allen, Dr. Porter Lillis, and Shannon Maynor. I can't do anything without Shannon. And my students. Every semester, you inspire me to continue to do this work. Now, you have some homework to do, okay? Before I turn over to our first speaker, Christine Commerce, you all must get this phone number in your phones. It's the Polaris Project, and it's 888, you can just write it down, 3737-888. If you see any signs of human trafficking, you may want to call 911, but your first phone call, and my speaker can verify this, try the Polaris Project, 888-3737-888. And at last count, they were speaking over 200 different languages, if I remember correctly. So even if you don't know what's going on or you speak English as your second language, you can speak to them. Okay, so we're starting with our keynote speaker, Christine Commerce. As Dr. Prusank mentioned, she is the program director of Alliance to End Human Trafficking, and she's going to be speaking about labor trafficking and crimes against humanity. She has worked in the nonprofit world with volunteer management, education and outreach, program expansion, event planning, marketing, and public relations for more than 14 years. And she's probably not even 20 yet. She's such a beautiful girl. Before she joined the Alliance to End Human Trafficking, she served as the executive director of the Keep Hillsborough County Beautiful, and it received a #1 affiliate award for 2 consecutive years through the Keep America Beautiful system. She most recently served as coordinator of the Diocese of Orlando, that's a Catholic diocese, its Human Trafficking Task Force, which received that Polaris number, that Polaris organization, 888-3737-888. She received the Polaris Star Award, the program did, for its collaboration and educational efforts in her community. She has conducted many presentations and trainings on this topic, both locally and nationally, to a variety of audiences, as she's doing today. She has a Bachelor of Science in Journalism and Communications from the University of Florida, enrolled in a public relations certificate program at the University of South Florida, and has participated and attended several human trafficking training conferences since she began in the fight against human trafficking 8 years ago. Please welcome Christine Commerce.
So I'm so honored to be here today with so many esteemed colleagues, and I'm so appreciative that you guys took time out of your busy schedules to really learn more about this, both in person and those who are online. So as Pam mentioned, my first introduction to human trafficking was the movie Taken, right? So a lot of us have seen that movie, and once I became more aware about this issue, I wanted to become more involved. I'll never forget one of the first little films that I watched. It was like a little PSA, and it was about a family here in the United States. And they were down to their last sandwich. And they were trying to figure out how they were going to feed this family with this last sandwich. So what they ended up doing was packing up their sandwich, one of their daughters, and dropped her off at the subway station. And as I watched this film and tears were streaming down my face, I wanted to yell, don't do it. Don't abandon her. I wanted to reach through the screen. I'll give you the money that you need. And unfortunately, this happens here not only in the United States, as we saw in COVID, where people had to maybe sell their kids to the landlord for sex to pay their rent. We see this happening around the world. Parents are given the incredible, difficult decision of whether to allow their daughters to be sold off to men 6 times their age. And then we also see this with trusted neighbors, a family friend who promises their children to take them to the United States for an education, for a better life, where they end up in labor trafficking. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about mostly what's happening around the world, as well as what's happening here in the United States. And there's so many different types of labor trafficking, right? And we're not going to talk about them all today because we just don't have the time. But when you think of labor trafficking, you may think of that little boy or that little girl over in India making rugs. You may think of, someone out there picking the cocoa pods. You may think of baby factories where women are forced, they're impregnated, they're forced to have babies, and then those babies are sold to couples, or they're sold for organ trafficking. Organ trafficking, another form of human trafficking, where people are tricked because they're desperate for money. So there's all sorts of labor trafficking out there. When I first learned about this issue, the first thought that popped into my head was, I thought slavery had ended, right? What's called now modern day slavery or human trafficking. And while it looks very differently today because it targeted a very specific race, we know now that the victims of human trafficking can be any race, religion, or socioeconomic background. So slavery has been legally abolished with the 13th Amendment in 1865. And yet there are more people enslaved around the world than there were during 200 years ago during the transatlantic slave trade. Except it just looks a little bit differently now. And while slavery has been abolished in every single country, it still exists. Go ahead.
This is a call to action. To find your place among these faces. You may not recognize them, but each of them dedicated their lives to one thing: ending slavery. As long as there's been slavery, there have been those rising up against it. They called themselves abolitionists. These men and women bravely did their part in the long fight. Right now, as you watch this, millions of people around the world are still enslaved. And although it looks different than it did before, so do we. We are A-Teams, the new and final abolitionists. A global and united force, and we need you. And this is our call to action, to be among the men and women who will be remembered, not by our faces or names, but for taking our place in the fight. As long as there is slavery, there will be A-Teams. Join us.
So that video is actually courtesy of A21. But it takes a village. We can't do this individually now in little silos. It takes collaboration. It takes working together with other organizations. Frederick Douglass once said that knowledge is the pathway from slavery to freedom. So the second thought that popped into my head after I asked myself, wait, I thought slavery had been abolished, was how do we not know about this? And the third thought is we have to educate people about this issue. So when we talk about human trafficking, it usually involves either force, fraud, or coercion. So here in the United States, you have to prove one of those, whether you're a labor trafficking or sex trafficking victim if you're 18 years or older. If you're under the age of 18 and you're being bought and sold for sex, you do not have to prove that force, fraud, or coercion. But typically the force could involve the beatings, the kidnapping, sexual assault, usually done in the very first beginning stages of human trafficking. And that's to usually break down the victim. Then we talk about the fraud. The fraud could be false promises for a better life, a marriage, a job, a relationship. And then we've got the coercion. So then coercion are threats. Could be threats to their family members, threat to themselves, to their pets, threats to share photos online. So it's just important to distinguish the difference between trafficking and smuggling. So while smuggling is transportation-based, trafficking is exploitation-based. However, someone can be both smuggled and trafficked. This is the fastest growing criminal industry in the world. It is second only to illegal drugs and recently passed the illegal gun trade. People say that sometimes they think it might actually surpass the illegal drug trade as well. That's because drugs you can sell once, people you can sell over and over and over again. It is an estimated $32 billion industry in the United States. And so why is this happening? The traffickers have a need for greed, power, control, and wealth. Because there is such a low risk for the traffickers of getting caught, much less prosecuted, that's what makes it such a lucrative, growing industry. And so when you've got people, there's plentiful supply. How many of you have taken Economics 101? Anyone? Right? If there would be no demand, there would be no supply. It's simple Economics 101. But because there's such a high demand, and because there is a readily supply of vulnerable people, that's what makes this an incredibly difficult industry to tackle. We want demand for prostitutes and child victims, pornography, and cheaper products. So when we talk about labor exploitation, labor trafficking, you have to understand there's a lot of different varying degrees. So here on the yellow pin, you may see the migrant farm worker, right? Who may have willingly come here and is being paid very little. And we take advantage of that. Could we pay a little bit more for the crops that they pick so they get paid a fair wage? Then on the black pin, you may see a 15-year-old girl who was promised love, relationship by her trafficker, who's also known as a Romeo pimp or Romeo trafficker. So slowly she may be beaten, raped, trafficked. The average lifespan of a sex trafficking victim is about 7 years. They'll either be used up and discarded or they are killed. And then you've got the cases in between, right? So maybe you have someone who's being prostituted. Are they on the yellow pin? Are they on the red pin? Are they on the way to the black pin? So who are the victims? The victims are all around us, and we just don't know it. They don't always have to be tied up somewhere in a basement. They could be going to school with you. They could be going to your church, and we don't realize it. There was a case that involved massage workers on the Treasure Coast, and basically this was that case with Robert Kraft, who was arrested as part of the sting operation. Unfortunately, the victims did not get the justice that they needed. See, what happens is that sometimes they are promised a job, and once they come here, they find out that job promises is very different. And so these women were brought over from China, and they were forced not only to work in this massage parlor, but also to sell sexual services. And because they weren't willing to work with law enforcement, because you have to understand, when you're coming from another country and you may not know the language, you know, back in maybe in your country, law enforcement is often corrupt. You're taught to fear law enforcement. You may be threatened with deportation. Your families may be threatened back home. They may know who your parents are and threaten to kill them, or they may say, this is going to happen to your little sister if you say anything. So oftentimes they don't want to cooperate with law enforcement. We see this happening with modeling agencies that pretend to lure girls away with a dream of becoming a model. We see this with Jeffrey Epstein. So just like the victims can be anyone, so can the traffickers. They can be multimillionaires, right? It doesn't matter. Exotic dancers. There was a case of an exotic dancer, and she had a special needs daughter, and she wanted to put herself through law school. And so she thought this was the best way for her to make that money in order to do so. Shortly thereafter, she was invited by the new owner to go to dinner. She was told she was going to have to sell herself for sex. And when she refused, she was taken, beaten, raped, and found herself in the sex trafficking industry for 2 years. So maybe, yeah, she started out on that yellow pin, right? It was a job that she chose, probably because of her lack of resources and her circumstances. But then she ended up on that black pin. So here are some of the products that we may find. I want you to raise your hand if you have victims of human trafficking working for you. And maybe people online can raise your little virtual hands, right? Okay, now I want you to raise your hand if you own a cell phone. Do you buy chocolate, seafood? Do you drink coffee? Do you buy clothes? I'm assuming you all buy clothes, you're all wearing clothes. All right, do you get your nails done? Do you buy produce, right? These are all products that can be tainted with labor trafficking or child labor that is being imported here from around the world. So I'll share another story. It was October, Halloween was coming up, and I walked into the grocery store, and there it was. Buy one, get one free chocolate. And I was so tempted. It was so cheap, and there was so much of it. But then I remembered the story of a little boy who was lured with the simple promise of a bicycle away from his family, one that he never saw. Or another little boy, Ali Diabati, who said beatings were a part of his life. They're forced to eat bananas and yams, given nothing else to eat, forced to sleep on black tarps. They never even get to taste the chocolate that they work so hard for. They're working 12 to 14 hours a day. One former child laborer told reporters that, what would you say to people who eat chocolate? Tell them that they're eating something I suffered to make. Tell them they're eating my flesh. So I do have some good news. You don't have to give up chocolate, right? And so as Pam or Judy mentioned, and as Pam has out there, right? Fair trade chocolate is another way to go. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that later, and as well as Pam. So I'm going to give you guys some homework. You didn't think you were going to come here and get homework, right? So I want you to go on slaveryfootprint.org. It's 11 questions. You can find out, based on the products that you have, how many people in slave labor may work for you. I had over 60 people working for me. Now, it didn't ask me if I buy fair trade chocolate and all that stuff, but that's okay. But it's amazing, and it's overwhelming. And you may think, okay, what can we do about such a pervasive issue? And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So these are just some examples. If you download the Sweat and Toil app from iLab, it can give you a list of all the products from around the world and which countries use forced labor, child labor, forced child labor. These are just the top 5 trafficked products here that we import in the United States. We are the largest importer of products and trafficked products around the world. So although most of these products are produced around the world, we are partially guilty because we are the ones that are consuming them and contributing to that demand. So let's just talk about one of these products. Let's talk about fish and seafood. Many of our fish and seafood products are imported from around the world, whether it's Indonesia, Thailand, India. The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops is actually doing a boycott right now for labeling for Lent campaign on any shrimp imported from India. So you can ask where your seafood is sourced from. Is it sourced locally? you know, or is it sourced from somewhere else? And then you can help create that demand. Because what's happening in the seafood industry, and we actually have a webinar called Freedom for Fishermen. And if you also Google the Associated Press reports, they did some investigative reports on slavery in the seafood industry. These men and boys, some as young as 12, are lured with a job onto these fishing vessels and sometimes kept up to 12 years on these fishing vessels. They are not allowed to come ashore because there are ships that go out to these ships, collect the seafood, and come back. And partially it's because there's overfishing, that they're having a hard time getting jobs for these fishing industries. And so what happens if they complain, if they get sick, they are beaten and they are thrown overboard. According to this Associated Press investigative report, they found men who were being held against their will in jails or cells or cages on this island. And so are we doing our part as consumers and asking where our seafood comes from? Here is an inspiring story for you on how we as consumers can make a difference. All right, so if you go to the grocery store, look on the cans of tuna fish. I don't know if anyone's seen in the news lately, Bumblebee Tuna, who has a lawsuit right now by some of the workers, right, because of the working conditions that they were subjected to. But look on the cans of tuna fish. Every single can of that tuna fish will say dolphin safe tuna. How did that happen? And back in the 90s, you may remember that, some of you may remember, there was a documentary and people saw dolphins being killed on these fishing vessels. And so people started boycotting the tuna industry. And so the US government soon got involved after that to regulate, because then they started labeling their cans of tuna fish dolphin safe. So then the US government started regulating that, and then we saw a change. But if we can have dolphin safe tuna, why can't we have slave-free seafood? I just saw for the first time on a can of tuna fish, fair trade. And we should have that on every single can of tuna fish and seafood. So the US government has gotten better. They will turn away millions of dollars worth of products and shipments if they know that it has been tainted with some type of slave labor or labor trafficking, right? So we also have to do our part. Sometimes do we know what about the products that we're purchasing, or do we just look the other way? So the global supply chain, it's so pervasive. It's not a simple solution. There are so many steps along the supply chain, from the little children who may be in Madagascar who are mining the mica that we use in our cell phones and our makeup and some of the products in our automobiles and so forth. It can be happening in the production stage. It can be happening in the transportation stage. This is not an easy solution. So I don't want to make it sound as just as easy as just buying fair trade, but that is a start. So now I want to switch gears. We're going to talk a little bit about the labor trafficking of what's happening here in the United States. So the most common form of labor trafficking, according to Polaris, is domestic work, agricultural, construction, restaurants, the hospitality and hotel industries, illicit massage. There's a whole set of different types of industries that this can be pervasive. Now, North Carolina ranks in the top 10 for the number of calls to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. So let's just look at some of these examples. Can you play this video?
Hey, good morning.
Oh, hi, come on in. If you need anything, we'll be in the other room.
Thank you.
This should have been done already.
You're so careless and clumsy. Can't you remember?
Handa ka na ba sa trabaho na to?
I've got to find it. Ano nga ang pangalan? O yan, tikman mo yan. Para sa'yo.
sekarang Dina excited ka?
Head southeast on West Harbor Drive toward
What took you so long to get inside?
Akin na. Ako na muna magdadaan. Honey?
This is your room and this is your bed.
This can't keep going on like this.
Mahal ko rin.
So there was a case, as we know, the traffickers can be anyone. Sometimes there've been cases of even diplomats from other countries who've had domestic workers in labor trafficking. They're often hard to detect because they're not out in the general public. But there was a party one time at a wealthy family home, and there was two women. Their room was that little closet underneath the stairs. And one of the women tried to get the attention of the guests by making some noise. And one of the guests was like, "What is that noise?" Right? And then the hostess, she brushed it off. Eventually, those women got out of that situation, but her ear was severely damaged by the woman for trying to make that noise, trying to get out of that situation. So domestic work is one way. Agriculture is another. And I'll share this story right here. It's called, we have a webinar on our YouTube channel called Slavery in Our Tomatoes if you'd like to learn more about this issue. But this started with a group of 6 workers called the Coalition of Immokalee Workers. And what happened was that these workers weren't allowed to take breaks for a drink of water. If they did, they would get beaten. They were working under armed guards who would intimidate them to work faster. And so they finally said, okay, this is enough. We need to be treated better. They went on a 30-day hunger strike. The Catholic Church got involved to end that hunger strike. And so what would happen was that there were ways for them to report, but then the people who were overseeing them said, well, you can file your report, but I'm just going to come back and beat you the next day, right? So the workers were afraid to report, and the system that they had in place was not working. So they decided to hold the growers and the buyers more responsible. So these people were making 32 cents to pick 40 pounds of tomatoes. They had to pick 2.5 tons of tomatoes to make minimum wage. And yet the growers were getting $60 to $80 for that 32 pounds of tomatoes, right? And so what happened was that they formed what is called this Fair Food Program. So with this Fair Food Program, then the buyers had to be held responsible for the treatment of the workers, right? So basically, they had to ensure that they were getting water breaks, that sexual assault was not happening in the fields, that they were not getting beaten. These are basic human rights that every worker should have. And so what happened was that there were students around college campuses who started boycotting places like Taco Bell and so forth to get them to sign on to the Fair Food Program. And Wendy's still hasn't signed on, but a lot of places has, like McDonald's and Whole Foods. And you can see that label. I'll have an example of that label later on. This Fair Food Program has now launched from Florida and is spreading across the United States. Another example of traveling sales crews. So we see that kids also can get labor trafficked in this country. If anyone saw the New York Times article talking about the children who are working in meat packing plants, they're working in agricultural industries as well as traveling sales crews. So they may be recruited by a group of individuals. They may go against the name Teens Against Drugs and Alcohol. We'll teach your kids valuable job skills. We'll get them off the streets. Except they're taking advantage of these kids. They're taking them into other counties, and they're going 12-hour days, door to door, selling trinkets from the dollar store, candy bars, and so forth. They were taken into neighborhoods with registered sex offenders. They didn't have access to bathrooms. They had to purchase their own drinking water. They didn't even have access to seatbelts in one particular case. They were forced to sit on each other's laps in this van on plywood benches. And one child actually ended up dying in one of these situations because he had epilepsy and they didn't know and they didn't have his medication. So there's all sorts of groups that take advantage of our youth. And if you ever come across these youth, there's some reputable youth out there that are trying to raise money, like the boys clubs, girls clubs, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts. But ask questions. Ask them, hey, where do you go to school? Do they go to school locally? Where can I find out about getting my son, daughter involved with this? If there's a van, maybe you can take a picture of the license plate, report it to local authorities. So why do victims stay? If they're not tied up, if they're not held against their will, why do they stay? Because they're threatened maybe with deportation. They don't know that they're a victim of human trafficking. Many of them have not even heard of that term. They may know that they're being exploited, but they don't know that they're a victim of human trafficking. They're taught to fear law enforcement, as we mentioned. There may be threats, as we also mentioned, to their family, to their friends. Maybe they are drugged, or they're brainwashed. They think they're in love with that Romeo trafficker, with that boyfriend pimp. It's called the Stockholm Syndrome. So when we look for signs of a possible victim, you can look for signs, are there signs of bruising, beatings? Are they malnourished? Do they look fearful? Are they looking to someone else to speak for them? So there's a lot of different signs, whether it's their living or working conditions. If you're going into a massage parlor, is there video cameras out? Are there bars on the window? Do you see mattresses where the women are forced to sleep? And then here are some of the questions you can engage with them. Now, you don't want it to be like an interrogation. You want it to be more like a conversation. So I'll give you an example of one of my colleagues. She went to a nail salon at the local mall, and she was asking one of the ladies just some questions, but she noticed the lady kept looking over to the owner, right? And eventually the owner came over and was like, who are you? What do you want? That's a red flag. That's a sign that something's not right here. Right? I fortunately have a friend who spoke Vietnamese, and I brought her to my nail salon to make sure that wasn't happening. But I had another friend who, she was getting her nails done regularly, and she noticed the girl who was doing her nails was no longer around. So she asked the lady, oh, what happened to so-and-so? How come she's not here anymore? So the owner, was like, oh, she went back home. She went to visit her family. And when he walked away, she said the person who was doing her nails looked at her and said, did that. These are all signs that you can report to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. I would say, though, just a disclaimer, here's a warning, be careful when you engage with potential victims of human trafficking. You don't know if someone's pimp, if you see someone walking down the street, you don't know if their pimp is watching them. And you could put them at risk. If you're in a bathroom situation and you have, that privacy, that's a little bit different. But don't put yourself at risk, because I know a sex trafficking survivor who said she saw 2 people killed in front of her who tried to help her. Don't put yourself at risk and don't put them at risk. So you can always call also the National Human Trafficking Hotline that we mentioned here earlier today. Can you share this next video, please? This is something else you can do to get involved as a student.
In order to make a difference in human trafficking, I did a variety of things. I started at home.
I volunteered at a local organization.
Volunteer my creative skills in video producing and photography.
I used the theater as a platform to inform the masses.
I helped put screenings on to educate others about what is happening in this world.
I wrote a book to educate little girls on how to know their self-worth and know how valuable they are.
I also donated my birthday parties throughout high school to raise money for the cause.
I'm a writer, so I used my blog as a platform to inform my peers about what I knew was going on.
I got together with a group of friends and we formed an abolition group in our high school.
I used my graphic design skills to design flyers, to generate awareness.
Organize a concert.
Have a fashion show.
Run a race.
Write a blog.
Intern.
Volunteer.
Paint a picture.
Design a graphic.
You can use whatever you love to make a difference.
Together, we can end human trafficking.
Thank you, 821. I hope I didn't steal any of your videos. All right, I know I'm about out of time, but just how businesses and corporations have a responsibility, I just want to end with this note that we too have that responsibility. And I know this issue seems overwhelming and it makes you feel like, okay, what can I do? Well, I'd like to put it in this perspective. David took 5 stones to defeat Goliath. Can you pick 5 products and change the way you purchase those products? And you may say to me, I am a student, I can't afford to buy fair trade, I can't, they don't even offer some of this stuff in where I live. Well, that's okay. Can you contact some of your favorite businesses or corporations that you buy from and ask them what they're doing to address slavery or human trafficking in their global supply chain? So we have someone talking about fair trade. I'm not going to really go into that, but that is another option for you. And as I mentioned, this is the logo for the Fair Food Program as well, that you'll see on some places like Whole Foods and so forth. So there's lots of ways that you can get involved, whether it's volunteering. You can follow us on social media, share posts on social media. It's such an easy way to get the message out there. Educating others what you learned here today is another way. Keep us in your prayers. Prayer for survivors, for services. There's so many services that are lacking for survivors of human trafficking. And so we just really appreciate you taking the time. I want to end on this quote. If you don't know who William Wilberforce was, he was a politician in England. He worked in Parliament, and he was instrumental in abolishing the transatlantic slave trade in England. And he also is famous for a quote that you can say that you looked, you can say that, now my mind went blank. Yes, thank you. You can choose to look the other way, but never can you say again, you do not know. That will end. Thank you.
Mr. Gaddy, can you pull up my PowerPoint, the third one down? Next on our agenda, I just need a minute, are going to be Hope Lloyd and Alex Herring. So I just want to have you all do me a favor now. Like Christine said, we're going to get a little homework. The third slide down, please. This is the Sweat and Toil app that you referenced. I'm sure Pam's going to be talking about it as well. iLab is the International Labor Association, but this is on our Department of Labor's website. Pull out your cell phones, please. Go to your Google Play Store or your iPhone, whatever that's called, the Apple Store, and just just type in Sweat and Toil. I've had it on here for years. I have my students do it, so some of my students have already done it. But it's going to look like this. So when you download it, and it should install pretty quickly, it's a great site. And you can do one thing, you can pull up you can pull up the countries, like this is pulled up Colombia, or you can pull up goods or exploitation types, but I like goods because we're consumers. So anybody not able to get the Sweat and Toil app up? Okay, so go to goods, and I just want you to put in your favorite thing that you buy. And my husband loves bananas, so I have to buy them for him constantly. So I'm going to put in bananas, but you can put in anything you want. And you're going to see child labor is used in Brazil, Ecuador, Belize, Nicaragua, and the Philippines. And one thing about bananas and any produce, because I think Christine mentioned produce, the word produce, any produce you buy is going to tell you where it's from. So I had to stop buying fresh shrimp because I saw that it was high exploitation from the one country, which I will not mention. Well, I can mention the country, Thailand, but I'm not going to mention the store. But the bottom line is you can go up to your supermarket manager and say, do you know that the bananas are from Belize? I have to buy them for my husband, but I can't buy them because they're high possibility of exploitation. So this is a great little shopping app. So when you go, by the way, you can look up lots of things, electronics, etc. But if you know that this is going on and you have proof on your phone as you shop, it's hard to shop this way, but you get used to it. It's not that hard. You'll be able to honestly slow down what's going on with human trafficking. So thank you. So we'll have your Sweat and Toil apps now. So glad. All right, our next two speakers, and thank you so much, Christine. Her talk always teaches me so much more about what I can do to end labor trafficking. Okay, so we have sisters coming up, Hope Lloyd and Alex Herring, and they're going to be talking about labor trafficking, the overlap between illegal immigration and exploitation. Hope is a 13-year survivor of 13 years of labor trafficking. She has 15 years experience in public speaking, mentoring, and advocacy. She trains organizations, nonprofits, and companies on human trafficking prevention, and she's contributed her expertise through numerous contacts and volunteer efforts in both North and South Carolina organizations. But she has a degree in criminal justice. It's not from here though, right? And Homeland Security and counterterrorism, because she is committed to developing lasting solutions to combat this crime. And for the past 7 years, it's amazing because I think this is so great. She's an online fitness coach to empower women to build the physical strength and mental resilience, help them to unlock their full potential. I think that's a wonderful skill to have in addition to all the other skills you have. And Alex Herring, her sister, is a lived experienced expert of child labor trafficking in North Carolina. She has 15 years of advocacy and survivor leadership experience at the federal, state, and local level. She's a graduate of Elon, a marketing writer for LabCorp, and a former consultant for Christine Long's organization, the North Carolina Human Trafficking Commission. In this capacity, she developed anti-trafficking training resources for law enforcement officers, service providers, local businesses, faith-based organizations, and more. And previously, she served on the board of an anti-human trafficking organization in the Piedmont Triad. She and her sister are so committed to the anti-trafficking movement, and they have collaborated with other leaders in this space to address the needs of trafficking survivors and help drive civic engagement throughout North Carolina. She's a mother of 2 children, congratulations, and she is now helping to raise awareness to with the next generation of modern day abolitionists. By the way, our Christine Long will probably address it briefly, but the schools are going to have an anti-human trafficking curriculum if they don't have it already, because we have to get this message to the grammar schools, especially the middle school and high school. So welcome, Hope and Alex.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for having us. I'm Hope.
And I'm Alex. I don't know if this is on. Okay, I'm Alex. And we are so just encouraged to see all the people online and to see everyone in the room. It always just fills me with hope when I see people come to these events and wanting to learn more. So thank you all for taking time out of your day to come learn about this issue.
So today, Alex and I will be talking about labor trafficking, specifically exploring the overlap between illegal immigration and exploitation.
And just a note to say, obviously, not all labor trafficking happens through illegal immigration. This is just our experience and perspective on it. But labor trafficking happens with domestic people, like US-born citizens, just as much as it does outside of the US.
So what is human trafficking? You'll hear this a lot today. But human trafficking is defined as using force, fraud, or coercion to manipulate someone into performing labor or sex acts in exchange for something of value, not always money. Any commercial sex act with minors is illegal and considered trafficking. So we are Alex and Hope. I was born in the UK.
And I was born in Hong Kong, which was a UK territory at the time when I was born. And I was also, we had the same trafficker, but the trafficker legally adopted me. And that's important to know for later because that had ramifications and consequences for the rest of my life.
I was not legally adopted by my trafficker. Yes, so both of us did not have our documentation either.
And we both had, our biological families were very vulnerable, had a lot of risk factors, single mothers who didn't have a lot of options, didn't have a lot of family support network. And as Christine mentioned, that can be a huge risk factor for trafficking when you feel like you don't have other options. If you have children and you're wondering, how am I going to support them, and you don't have your village, unfortunately, that means that a trafficker can use that to exploit you.
Yes, so my mom also had broken English, no support system. So she was also very vulnerable and a target for a trafficker. We also had our names legally changed several times by our trafficker, and that's a reason that she could be inconspicuous and like try to fly under the radar, because we changed our identity several times then.
And she also changed her name several times. So it was very hard for law enforcement to be able to even find her, because she would be under the system under one name, and then she had another name. And so that was just a tactic that a trafficker can use to avoid detection, to avoid being caught.
Yes. So the learning objectives for today is understanding the intersectionality of labor trafficking and illegal immigration, be aware of the challenges faced by undocumented survivors. And this is very important. We have no political agenda here today. Unfortunately, trafficking is a consequence of what is happening today, and all children have a right to safety and freedom and protection, and that is our focus.
Yeah, Hope and I are both very politically neutral. We're not here to say this administration did it better, this one did it worse. We're really just here to just show like this is a very complicated, multifaceted issue. We don't necessarily have the solution, but we hope that we can just shed light and give people an understanding and appreciation of what some people who come to this country illegally go through. And it's not necessarily because we're here to steal jobs or, whatever it is. So.
Okay, so the hidden crisis. Labor trafficking is one of the most widespread but least recognized forms of modern day slavery. When people think of human trafficking, they often think of sex trafficking, but labor trafficking is just as common, but it is harder to see. Alex and I know firsthand, as we were labor trafficked as children. Our story isn't the focus of today, but it is why we do this work. Labor trafficking is real, it is happening right in our communities, and it often goes unnoticed. I will say that we spent 13 years in our situation, and I can think of 3 times we made contact with anyone who could have possibly, if they were educated or knew the signs, or if we had given any signs, those might have been times that we could have been rescued or made contact, but that was 13 years, that's over a decade.
Yeah, and of course it is great to be educated on red flags, but I will also just say traffickers are so smart at covering their tracks that it is really hard to notice those signs. Even in the video from A21, which I think is a great video of the girl who's washing dishes and the man comes in doing maybe some maintenance works and he sees her being abused right there by her trafficker. Like, if you saw that, that's great. But to be honest, like in our experience, like our trafficker was very charming, very charismatic. She was very good at showing one face to the world and showing one face inside the home when it was just us at the home. And I've talked to other survivors who said the same thing, like their traffickers were leaders in the community. They were clergy people. They were very involved in volunteer and civil work. So it would be somebody you would never dream of would be a trafficker, and you would never see them like openly abuse somebody. So yeah, just something to keep in mind.
Yeah,
too.
that video actually, I was like, wow, it kind of seems like, wow, that's not realistic, but that was actually very realistic. That's exactly what happened to me. I remember being flown to one country and documents being taken away. Our parents are promised something that doesn't happen. We're promised a great life, education, whatever. And then you get to the location and it's not what you think it is, and game over. So very accurate. So again, what is labor trafficking? We went over this before, but it is the use of force, fraud, coercion to trap someone into working under exploitive situations. So force, that's physical abuse, confinement, or threats. Threatening your family, threatening you. In our case, she would threaten my sister, or vice versa. fraud, false job offers, very misleading promises, and most often it's nothing that you're promised. Coercion, threats of deportation, harm to family, and withholding the basic necessities. So when you don't know your rights, especially when traffickers move you from country to country, from when children are being trafficked, they often don't know their rights. And it's intentionally made that way. So your trafficker intentionally
You're groomed,
yeah,
basically. Yeah,
exactly. You're groomed and not allowed to read the news, newspapers, watch the news, be in the community. So you're unaware that this is actually really bad. You don't know the scale of how bad what you're living in is. Okay. And so how is it different from poor working conditions? And as Christine had mentioned earlier, there is a difference. So is it poor working conditions? That is wrong, and that, you know, we see that in the world, but that is not trafficking. Trafficked victims, we aren't allowed to leave. We are forced there. We have no other options. Okay, so labor trafficking in North Carolina, and who are the impacted workforces? So the industries affected are agriculture and fishery. So migrant workers are very vulnerable to wage theft, poor housing, pesticide exposure, and threats of deportation. Construction industry, day laborers, often dangerous conditions, no pay guarantees, and retaliation if they complain or step out. In the food and hospitality service industries, this is huge. Trafficked workers can be found in hotels, restaurants, food trucks, and meat processing plants with long hours and very unsafe working conditions. Domestic work and servitude, housekeepers, nannies, who are very isolated, living in private homes, unable to leave, and subject to emotional and physical abuse. And sometimes, often they have their children with them living in that house. Salons, so this is a broad term, but this is including nail salons, massage parlors, and similar establishments where workers are facing wage theft, long hours, and surveillance on them 24/7, and threats if they decide to leave. So labor trafficking stats in North Carolina. So North Carolina consistently ranks in the top 10 states for trafficking cases reported. In 2023, the National Human Trafficking Hotline received 684 reports from North Carolina. 49 were labor trafficking cases. Prevalence of abuse. A study involving over 400 migrant farm workers in North Carolina revealed that approximately 25% experienced some form of employment abuse, with nearly 18% reporting incidents that could contribute to labor trafficking. Federal cases. In 2021, 6% of active defendants in North Carolina federal courts were charged with forced labor, highlighting ongoing legal actions against labor trafficking in the state. Okay, so this is one of our case studies here in North Carolina. So not so far from here, Jacksonville, North Carolina. It was June 2022. The defendant, Oscar Rangel Gutierrez. He's a Guatemalan national, and his charges were conspiracy to commit forced labor, harboring illegal aliens for commercial advantage. The victims were minors from Guatemala. He was using threats, debt bondage, and physical abuse to coerce the minors. They were underpaid or not paid at all, and they lived in very overcrowded, unsanitary, unsafe working conditions. He threatened them with deportation if they resisted. And obviously, like children or adults from Guatemala or any other country, most of the time they're not speaking English. They don't know anyone here. So even if they were to leave, who's going to help them? They're usually afraid of law enforcement. And again, they don't know their rights. They are not from here. So threatening them with deportation is a very real and scary thing. So it's not just as easy as leaving. Labor trafficking case study 2 in North Carolina. There was a case study of domestic servitude in Union County, North Carolina in 2009. In 2009, a woman in Union County, North Carolina was arrested for human trafficking and involuntary servitude of forcing 3 young girls into domestic labor for 13 years. The victims were made to cook, clean, and care for farm animals, the house, and for their trafficker, while being denied education and subjected to physical, emotional, and psychological abuse. This case exposed the long-term exploitation of victims in residential neighborhoods and highlighted how domestic servitude can go unnoticed for years, even in plain sight. These girls, when they were in public, they would be transported by their trafficker to stores like a 24-hour Walmart, and they would be made to shop. They would be given money and made to shop at, past 12 a.m. When the stores were not as crowded. They were isolated from the community and did not have activities within the community, no friends. People did not come to the house. People did not know where they lived.
Okay, so one thing that I want you all to take away today, if you don't get anything else from this presentation, is just remember that when traffickers commit crimes, which they all do, they do force their victims to take part. And so I think this is probably more well known in sex trafficking, where if there is a minor who is being forced into prostitution, that minor is not charged with prostitution, they are identified as a sex trafficking victim, and there's protections in place. And I really think there's really opportunity in the labor trafficking space to see that same protection for a minor of illegal immigration who came here, who didn't have the choice, the informed choice to be here, that they were forced or coerced or, under fraud pretenses, were brought here by their trafficker. And so I think there's space for that as well. And I think that needs to be a larger discussion on a legislative scale. And, there's so many different types of exploitation and trafficking. All of these are very common: sexual, physical, emotional abuse, financial abuse, religious abuse. Today, I'm really going to focus on the legal exploitation, because I think this impacts so much of a victim's ability to be empowered. And I don't know that a lot of people realize how much that can be a barrier to leaving. So we're going to really explore that today. And as Christine said, you'll probably hear it more today, that trafficking and smuggling is not the same thing. Generally speaking, people who are smuggled, there is more of a choice involved. They might be paying somebody to transport them across the border, whereas a labor trafficking victim is somebody who doesn't have that same informed choice. They've been coerced or tricked. And they think that they're coming here legally, or they think that, oh, it's all going to work out because this trafficker knows the laws and everything, and it's all going to be good. And then they come here and find out they're being enslaved. And as Hope mentioned, people who speak English as a second language are especially vulnerable. If you don't know the language and you don't know the laws, and you can't necessarily find resources in your local language, that's going to be a big barrier to you understanding how you can escape. Refugees and obviously minors are very vulnerable to being trafficked. So becoming illegal, there are many different visas that you can use to come into the country. And one popular one in North Carolina is the H-2A visa. It's one that a lot of migrant workers have, and it's in agricultural labor. The way that these people are exploited who have this visa is through debt bondage. Their trafficker will make up some fake fees and say, like, you owe me $5,000, as much that Polaris Project says, like it's as high as $5,000. So they'll say, I had to pay all of this to bring you into the country. Now you have to work for me until this debt is paid off. And so they can keep that stringing somebody along as long as they like. And in Polaris, suspects that in the agricultural sector, 76% of likely trafficking victims are undocumented immigrants. So, you know, it's really hard to tell sometimes to have like concrete stats because this is all based on estimation because again, there's a lot of victims who aren't coming forward and saying, hey, I need help because of the fear of deportation, but likely this is what Polaris projects. Temporary visas are another one. You could come in on a tourist visa, let's say that's a 3-month or a 6-month visa. You're here legally for a time and your trafficker says, oh, and we'll take you back to your country of legal residence, but then they don't do that and then you have no way to get back there and then you're entrapped. Or you could just have no visa at all. The trafficker could say, I've got your visa figured out, and then surprise, they never did any of that work, so then you just came here illegally, and then you don't even have a visa to try to find escape. So obviously, when the trafficker has control over your visa and the way you came into the country, they now have control over you. There is a fear of law enforcement, and deportation is probably the biggest one because they can just threaten to report you at any time. I know in our situation, our trafficker used to say all the time, like, the US hates illegal immigrants. You think if you leave me that you're gonna get any help? Like, no, they're just gonna deport you straight away. And, you know, we did not have a support system in the countries where we were from. So that was just a way that she could say, like, you have no one besides me. Again, the isolation from community, there's no supportive network. We weren't going to church, we didn't go to school, we didn't know any guidance counselors or any type of counselor. We didn't go to the doctor, we didn't go to hospitals. So we really just stayed home or we went to go shopping when our trafficker made us do it. But did you want to say something?
Yeah, so in our case, we had some nosy neighbors who for a while were like watching us in the house, and they would come home late and we'd be working outside. So there were signs and they paid attention, and over time, you know, wanted to find out more.
Yeah, I actually do remember a comment that a neighbor made one time. It was a family who lived kind of far away from our house, but she had 2 or 3 young daughters at home herself. And she used to tell her daughters, if you don't behave, like your life could be like those girls next door who are working the farm. And like, you know, you're so lucky you have school because we weren't going to, it was very obvious that we were on this farm and we weren't going to school. And it kind of became clear over time to the neighbors that this is what we were spending all of our time doing, was working outside in the farm, or, you know, we were inside the house. And so she would just like tell her kids literally like, your life could be like theirs. So she knew that there was something going on, and then she never actually reported. It was somebody else who did, but there were some signs. Again, just not being, this is before the time of social media for us, so we didn't have a way to find out resources online. We weren't allowed to listen to the radio or news, so there was no way for us to find out if there was any protections. And then I also just say substance abuse is another form of control that traffickers can use, and you know, whether it's to make prostitutes feel numb to what they're having to do to service clients, or in our situation, it was caffeine pills. We were given caffeine pills so that we could stay awake longer and keep working longer and keep producing manual labor for the trafficker. And I truly believe it started out as caffeine pills, and we were minors at the time. But truly, I think that if we had been in that situation longer, I think it would have escalated to harder substances and harder substances over time. So that's another thing too, like, when you're talking about the exploitation, it was literally, how can I get the most out of this service that I'm getting for free, manual labor, and how can I keep perpetuating this to go longer and longer to where it was, you know, it got up to like 18 hours of work a day because of the substances she was giving us.
Also, with like a control of food and resources, the refrigerators were locked, and we didn't have access to, you know, even food. So talk about caffeine pills and trying to keep you disoriented. And
yeah, so basic human rights of having adequate food and nourishment to do the manual labor, that was even denied. So yeah, she said that there were locks on the refrigerator. So you know, barriers to escape for some people, it is that false debt when they're told that they have these fake fees that they have to pay back, or unsafe working conditions where we were made to work outside and we weren't given boots, we weren't given jackets, we weren't given gloves, any of the proper gear that you would need to do manual labor in a farm environment. And especially like if you're not being fed on top of that, then over time your body just starts to wear down, and then you're physically weaker and you're much less likely to be able to fight back against your trafficker because they're withholding those basic rights and necessities. As minors, we were both, we were unable to legally drive, and even if we could have driven, we also weren't legal in this country, so therefore, we wouldn't have been able to get licenses. And the fact that we had these legal name changes meant, again, that she had the ability to change our identity if she wanted to, so she could just keep doing that and keep making sure that the police never found out where we were or who we were. On top of that, this trafficker did have control over our passports, so we didn't see them, they were locked up. We didn't have credit cards, we weren't going to school, we weren't going to hospital, so there was no record really of our existence in the US. And I do actually remember a time when the trafficker told me, you can't, I could kill you and dump your body out in the woods and no one would ever find you, because there wasn't any community that was being accountable to our existence even, and there weren't records of us anywhere. So if she decided to kill me and dump my body in the woods, that she would be the only one who would know, she and my sisters, but that would have been it. And that terrified me to think, if I cross her even once, she could do this and it would be like my whole existence was blanked out and it all came to nothing, is kind of how I felt. It was the whole like, you are nothing. And that is such a vulnerability for a trafficker to exploit. If you don't have like proof of your own identity and it's like you don't exist, they can do anything with that. In fact, International Justice Mission, they were working in a case in northern Thailand with these hill tribe people who there was like some dispute on the border between were they actually Thailand citizens or were they citizens of China. And because there was all of this dispute, the people of this town, I think it was like 900 people, did not have birth certificates. And so they didn't have proof of citizenship. And so they were extremely vulnerable to being trafficked because the trafficker could basically create this identity for them, a whole legal identity. So IJM, if you Google International Justice Mission, Thailand, Northern Hill Tribe people, it will probably come up, but then you'll see like they actually went through and made documentation for all 900 people of this village so that they had documentation to say like, I do belong to this governing body, there is somebody who is accountable for me, and there's like a level of protection there that makes it at least harder for traffickers to exploit you.
And also to tag off Alex, what she just said, a lot of that, the barrier to escape is a slow progression of mental and emotional abuse. So it's psychological. So over time, she puts in the fear. Like when you're a child, you don't know any different. You know what you're told and what you're taught. So it's just sometimes people are like, why don't you just escape or tell someone? You just don't. You can't. And you fear for your life. It's very fearful. I think one time we tried to cook up a plan to run away, and she would tell us, if you run away, the police will catch you and they will bring you right back to me. So,
right, because she was our legal guardian. So that was who, I guess we thought at the time there was no other option except to be returned to our legal guardian, who was the person who was abusing us. And a lot of times you do see depictions in movies in Taken or Sound of Freedom or something where the trafficker is somebody who didn't have a previous relationship with the victim and they develop one. But in a lot of cases that we personally, our own and other survivors, it's a member of their own family who's trafficking you. And so that adds like a whole other level of feeling like you can't escape, because it's not only the person who's trafficking you, but it's also the person that you were made to call mom or dad or whoever it is. So that makes it even harder to leave.
They're abusing you and controlling you, but they also offer you shelter. occasional food, I guess.
Enough
Yeah.
to live, like
Yeah,
barely.
so it's a very strange psychological control.
And then being illegal, even once there was a neighbor who did report the situation, there continued to be consequences of being illegal. So first of all, like, are you eligible for healthcare or health insurance when you're illegal? Very debatable. Can you go to school if you're not legally here? Debatable. I know for me, I was 15 at the time, and I was put into the foster care system, and there was counseling services available for other foster care children who were in the system, but I wasn't allowed those same services because they said, well, you're not a legal citizen, you don't get counseling. And I was like, that's not fair, I was abused too, but was not open to me. So yeah, my foster care services looked slightly different, and that was a hard thing to go through as a teenager, to realize I didn't do anything to be here, and it felt like I was being punished because I wasn't legally here. So, you know, that was a hard thing, obviously, but also just local language and cultural support can be difficult if you're talking about a foreign national who came here illegally. I remember, I think a year or two ago, Watauga County had a case of 3 Guatemalan nationals who came here, and they were labor trafficked, and they did not know how to help them because no one in the county who offered social services spoke Spanish. So they were in a scramble, like the girls didn't speak English, and they were like, what do we do? And so I think just even being aware that there needs to be, if we're going to really step up and help labor trafficking victims who were brought into the country illegally through no choice of their own, like, what can we be doing to provide translation and interpretive services for those people?
And also, Alex was 15 and there was foster care and group homes, but I was 18 and our older sister was 22. There was nowhere for us to go. A friend of the social worker had to find us a place. So like, I think now that's evolved, and there are hopefully better places for adults, but there were very little services for legal adults.
Absolutely. So yeah, what are things that we can do? I do love this quote from a Associate Director of Homeland Security Investigations a couple years ago. I think the first thing is that we should let unauthorized workers feel safer to report their situations. They should never be afraid to report unlawful labor practices. Whether or not you're here in the country legally, you should not have to be subjected to enslavement. And so I think that we just need to do a better job of telling people it doesn't matter if you're here legally or not. You as a human being have dignity, have the right to be in a home where you're not being abused, in a space where you are safe, where you are being fed, where you have rights.
So recognizing labor trafficking red flags. I think Christine mentioned this earlier in her presentation, but a lot of victims don't realize they are trafficked. They just know they can't leave. When we were rescued, I remember our immigration attorney telling us for the first time, oh, you are labor trafficked and domestic servitude. And we were like, what? What is that? Like, I didn't believe it. I didn't know what that term was.
Yeah, and she told us, she was the one who told us, you're eligible for a T visa. And I said, what is a T visa? And it's a visa for people who have been trafficked. It's a trafficking visa. And so I was like, oh my gosh, if we had known about this resource when we were being enslaved, like, we could have come out way sooner and said, like, please help, I'm a trafficking victim. I need the protection of the trafficking visa. But because we didn't know, there was no way for us to know that if we came out, like, we wouldn't be deported straight away, that there was a protection in place.
Yeah, because our trafficker let our tourist visa expire. So after 6 months, we were supposed to leave and she forced us to stay here. So, so some of the common warning signs are living where they work. So that's farms, restaurants, employers' housing. Fearful, unable to speak freely when they are approached. Gosh, like, I think we got a lot of strange looks when we were in public. Very few people ever spoke to us. I remember one time you were at a gas station and her hands were really chapped. And someone tried to make conversation or offered you hand lotion or something, but people didn't really, and I know we looked disheveled and smelled bad and, yeah, it was a sore sight to see. So I know there were red flags just looking at us. But you know, wouldn't know unless you approached us and started a conversation, which never really happened. So no control over IDs and passports. We never got paid. We never saw a cent.
No, I actually remember our trafficker saying the only thing you're worth for is the manual labor I can get out of you. So literally that was the only thing that we were good for in her eyes.
Extreme work, hours with little to no pay. Also, I want to add like the living conditions. We never had a bed. I don't think we ever had, there was a mattress, a little, a carpet thing, like a bedroll. So that's not like a Hollywood thing. Like for a lot of labor trafficking victims, that is a real thing. Those types of living conditions. We had constant supervision. So she would do the buddy system with us. So we would follow each other around and have to report if someone stepped out of line, or she would follow us all the time, call us around the house. She had intercom systems around the house. So there's a constant feeling of being watched constantly. So if you see like signs of people unable to speak for themselves, they look disheveled, they don't make eye contact, they're not able to speak freely, those would be some more immediate red flags. So how can you take action? So you're going to hear this a lot today, but if you see anything suspicious, call the National Human Trafficking Hotline. You can text at their app. You can text help to their number. North Carolina is a mandatory reporting state for minors. So if anything suspicious has happened with minors, you have a legal obligation to report that. You've also heard this with Christine, and you will hear this from Pam also, but fair trade certified products are a big, great, easy way to support anti-labor trafficking. And research companies to avoid exploiting workers further. Educate and spread awareness. Most people don't realize that labor trafficking, first of all, is happening here, and they don't often realize what that looks like when it is happening in front of them. The more we talk about it, the harder it is for traffickers to operate. They are unfortunately very intelligent. They know what they're doing. It wouldn't have gone on for this long and grown this widespread globally if they didn't have a system. Yeah, and then, no, you're good. It's also important to advocate for policy change within your state. Okay, so trauma-informed community response. If someone appears to be a victim, survivor, and open to talking, consider relocating to a private space. So this really applies to like healthcare workers, and they're often the first person who might see a victim. And that's also tricky for them because a lot of the time the trafficker will accompany the victim to the hospital. If there's a way to, in a short period of time, I know this is really difficult, but to gain a little bit of trust, because a victim's not just going to open up and talk, but asking some of the questions, they're not going to volunteer. So they would never volunteer and say, oh, you know, I'm afraid. Maybe ask the question, are you afraid right now? Are you being fed? Are you being physically hurt? Questions like that could open them up to talking, and then they might talk more because like, oh, someone notices something, because often you feel very unnoticed. So if someone asks one question, yeah.
And I would even just say as an encouragement, even if you don't in that short period of time identify, oh yes, this is a person who is being trafficked, just even a small interaction of kindness is something that's going to be an encouragement to the person being exploited, because at home they're not receiving kindness, or on the working fields they're being subjected to cruelty every single day. So honestly, just even if you just are kind and you speak words of affirmation over them, or you're just smiling and just being a welcoming human being, that's a bright spot in a trafficked victim's day. So even if you feel like, wow, I really didn't do anything, just hear me say this and say that I remember that woman who gave me the hand lotion when my hands were chapped, because that was the nicest thing anyone had done for me in a really long time. And you know, I was 16 or 15 or something when that happened, and I can still remember what this person looked like, because yeah, moments of kindness like that were so rare that I was just like, wow, I can't believe someone would just offer that to me, no expectations. So bear that in mind.
Yeah, that's a great point. Also, offer to call the human trafficking hotline for them, but also ask if they would like to do that themselves and give them the ability to speak for themselves. But just giving resources and saying, hey, you know, something might be happening. I just want to offer this resource, or is there someone I can call for you? Is there anything I can support you with? Like just opening that conversation if you feel like something might be off.
And what I see really as an opportunity for just larger community education, I really think when you understand labor trafficking and how illegal immigration does play a big role in that, hopefully, you know, we can say like illegal immigration is nuanced. It's not just black and white. There's a lot of areas of gray. What about those people who are being exploited and had no choice but to cross illegally? What can we do for them and have more justice in these situations? Helping victims self-identify by having resources. I've seen posters up in restaurants that say like, are you a victim? Like, do you feel you are experiencing these signs of abuse? That could be a way for a victim to find information and realize, wait a minute, I'm in this situation. And then again, just demanding those ethical business practices so that we're not contributing further to the cause of slavery. And then also I really just think aftercare services, because once you've been trafficked, that's something you live with the rest of your life. It's not like you're rescued and then you're suddenly healed. It's an ongoing years and years and years of having to unpack the abuse and the horrors that you went through. So I do feel like there should be aftercare services, counseling, legal aid. We would not be here today if it wasn't for the immigration attorney who identified that we were trafficking victims, and she worked so hard, like for months, to get all of our stuff processed so that we could be here. And you know, we didn't know who this woman was, but she just felt moved to help us. And it's because of her that we have a life in the US today. So she was the one who helped us get this T visa. So I think helping victims know that this visa even exists is a huge start. And having translation services again, so that when somebody is rescued, well, now they're just in a place where they have no one who speaks their language. That is just it's another isolation. So what can we do to bring native speakers involved into the movement? You know, even if that has to be virtually, great, we have a connection now. So there's just a lot we can do in this space to support those who have been rescued.
Along with counseling and legal aid services, a lot of survivors often come out and the basic things they don't know how to do, driving, you know, how do I apply for a job? How do I interview for a job? So like the basic things that we take for granted every day are often big hurdles in the beginning for survivors coming out, so.
And to just talk about kindness again, we were talking earlier about sometimes when you're first out of a situation, it's all you know, so you talk about it a lot. And it's really hard sometimes. It's a very heavy subject and people don't know how to handle that, and so they don't know what to say and they feel like they need to come up with something to say. And just know if that happens, if you're in a situation with someone who's recently been rescued, it's okay to not know what to say. Just say, I want to listen to whatever you want to share, and like, you don't ask more questions, just whatever they feel comfortable sharing with you, and say, you know, thank you for feeling safe enough to share that with me. And I think that really just goes a long way. And then these are just some additional resources that we have pulled that we really like. The Polaris Project, speakupnc.org, UNC School of Government has lots of resources for you on trafficking, sharedhope.org, and then Survivors Network. When Latiana comes, I'm sure she'll speak to this a lot, but the Survivor Network, nc.org, has a lot of resources for people who are survivors, who want ways to be empowered after they've been rescued.
All right, to conclude the call to action, labor trafficking is a hidden crisis, but we can change that. Traffickers thrive when people stay silent, so awareness is our biggest weapon. Sometimes it doesn't seem that way because we are repeating information again and again and again. We're like, is this getting us anywhere? Where's the real change? But the more aware people are, like even if you're changing one person's life, in our case, that was 2 nosy neighbors who, you know, we joke about that, about the nosy neighbors, but, you know, in our case, that really helped us. So these are just some final thoughts. Thank you so much.
Share how you were rescued.
Yeah.
Rescuing story. What happened?
So there was a neighbor who had noticed signs like it didn't look like we were ever going to school. We just looked very thin and malnourished. Our skin had lots of problems and stuff. And then she made a call to social services. And when I speak, I do like to say, like, this 5-minute phone call ended up saving my life. She just made a call to social services. She didn't even know about the trafficking hotline. She just said, hey, I think there's something suspicious going on in this home. And that led to social workers coming to our house. And thankfully, the timing of it worked out to where our trafficker was not home at the time.
Because the first time 5 years prior to her reporting this incident, a call was made. And the social worker made an appointment with our trafficker to come to the house and make a house visit. And so what do you think happened?
Our trafficker rehearsed everything.
Went out, bought groceries.
He found
bought
us beautiful dresses and said, here, put this on, go roller skate outside and make it look like you're having fun. And so everything, I mean, she had scripted answers for us to say, if the social worker asks you this, you say this. If she asks you where you're going to school, you say you're being homeschooled. If she asks you, like, if you get to have fun, oh yeah, every day, look at us, we were just roller skating. So she had very scripted answers for us. And I remember when the social worker came, our trafficker, we were on one sofa, the social worker was on the sofa opposite us, and the trafficker was sitting next to her. So every time the social worker asked me a question, there was my trafficker like glaring eyes at me, like, you're gonna say what I told you to say. And I knew if I didn't say exactly what she told me to, as soon as that social worker left, there was gonna be hell to pay. So we gave the answers that we were told to give.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was the first time, and you know, it didn't work out that we were rescued that day, but 5 years later, you know, a couple of nosy neighbors, they, the one in particular who made the call, it was a slow progression, so she'd try to come to the house. She could never get past the bench that we had there. And over Christmas, Thanksgiving, she bought us a little cake for Christmas cake, but she tried to get some information, any information she could, because it was so strange. I can only imagine how strange that situation was, but she continuously made attempts to either figure out what was going on based on red flags. And she was a court interpreter, so she would drive home around 3 o'clock in the morning, really late, and we would be with our torches, carrying chickens and everything, at 3 o'clock in the morning. So anyway, so thank goodness for her. But yeah, that's how we were rescued. Thank you, guys.
Wow, what an unbelievable presentation. Is this still on? No, it's not. Unbelievable presentation. Thank you so much. This has been awesome so far. Students are going to be leaving and other students are going to be coming in. So Latiana is on her way. She's going to be a little late. So Pam Strickland has agreed to just chat with us now. Pam is the founder of North Carolina Stop Human Trafficking. That's at least how many years old?
Oh, 15.
Oh, she's having her 15th birthday. Congratulations. The 15th year of the North Carolina Stop Human Trafficking started by Pam. She is also the chair of the board for the National Coalition Against Human Trafficking. Pam learned many years ago that human trafficking is a problem here in North Carolina, and she felt called to be actively involved in her community about this issue and working towards preventing human trafficking. Her nonprofit started in 2010, and she just celebrated her 15th anniversary. Pam has attended numerous conferences, received in-depth human trafficking training from a variety of entities, including Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the Freedom Network Training Institute, the Not for Sale campaign, the FBI, the State Bureau of Investigation, GEMS, and the best teachers of all, multiple survivors. And in 2016, Pam led the effort to start Pitt County Coalition Against Human Trafficking, modeled after the statewide group. In 2021, Pam helped organize the Pitt County Human Trafficking Multidisciplinary Team, a subcommittee of the coalition that directly works with victims and survivors. In 2020, Pam, along with 3 nonprofit leaders, formed the North Carolina Demand Reduction Task Force. She currently serves as the chair of the board for the North Carolina Commission Against Human Trafficking, and she trains professional groups in how to recognize human trafficking and respond to it. She recently trained groups include members of law enforcement, social workers, teachers, counselors, therapists, healthcare providers, and crisis intervention teams. Notice all those groups that I just mentioned: teachers, law enforcement, social workers, etc. They are on the front line. They are the most likely to see victims of human trafficking. And Pam will address one of my favorite topics, fair trade and its importance in the fight against human trafficking. Please welcome Pam Strickland.
Good morning. Is the mic working?
Yes, yeah. Pick that up and then make sure that the mic itself is on. The mic is on.
Yeah, it's on. It's green. Good morning. Is that better? All right. Hope y'all are doing good this morning. Those of you that are staying the whole time, I am really impressed because it's a heavy topic, and gosh, you've been sitting a long time too. So thank you for being here. So we are going to talk about fair trade in a little bit more in depth than Christine talked about it, but you stole my thunder, Judy. I was going to tell everyone it's our 15th anniversary. So we're celebrating all year. And I will just say that things have changed a lot in 15 years. Back in 2010, when we were incorporated, human trafficking was still a fairly new topic. And if people had heard of it at all, it was most certainly something that happened somewhere else and not here in the US, and certainly not here in North Carolina. So we've made a lot of progress, but of course we still have plenty of work to do. I do want to tell you a little bit about our nonprofit. We started in Pitt County, 2010. We have grown over that time and now serve the entire state. And our vision is a state free of human trafficking. So I think that's one we can all join in on. And our mission is creating communities that are actively working to abolish human trafficking. And I think this community here at UNC Pembroke is doing that primarily through Dr. Judy's work in having these conferences and being sure that this campus is educated and knows things that they can do to help stop human trafficking. So the ways that we go about trying to achieve our mission is, first of all, education. And as Dr. Judy pointed out, we really try to focus in on the professionals who are most likely to encounter a victim during the course of their work. Now, of course, we still do general community awareness. You know, the Kiwanis invite us and we go. But our sweet spot really is training professionals. The second thing you see is collaboration. So I am currently the chair of the North Carolina Coalition Against Human Trafficking, and that is a statewide group. I would certainly encourage you to go to ncaht.org and check that out if being a part of a networking group where you can learn from professionals all over the state is something that you're interested in. I did help start the North Carolina Demand Reduction Task Force, which is all about looking at the strategy of preventing human trafficking, which unfortunately those of us in the anti-human trafficking movement have not quite spent enough time on. We've spent a lot of time on serving victims, which of course is important, and you have to do that. But we also want to look at preventing folks from becoming victims, right? So that's the strategy behind the demand reduction. I think Christine is the one who mentioned there's supply and demand. And if we look at demand and see what can we do to reduce that, that's a prevention strategy. We are engaged also in policy and legislative work here in North Carolina, as well as at the federal level. And as we're going to talk about more, we're very much engaged with fair trade. So the whole point of my presentation to you today is this: buying and selling fair trade products is human trafficking prevention. Anybody want to argue with me about that? Hopefully by the end you will not. So in order for a product to be certified to be fair trade, there are certain criteria it has to meet. And we're not going to go through each of these in depth. This first slide generally applies to the business that is creating the product, right? The business sells their product for a fair price. It's direct trade, which means that there's not a whole lot of middlemen in it, which is one reason that the workers are able to be paid more and be paid a fair rate. It's a democratic, transparent organization. A part of the price is dedicated to community development, things like building schools, wells, that kind of thing, to improve the entire community. And one of my favorite criteria is that it has to be environmentally sustainable. So when you see things that are labeled fair trade, and several of the things that we have are recycled or reused products. So these, on this slide, these criteria pertain more to the actual employees. So there's a freedom of association. They can leave if they want to, right? There's safe working conditions, fair living wages. And that's the one that we focus on the most, a fair living wage. And of course, no child labor. So what exactly does that mean? You know, it sounds good that someone gets paid a fair living wage, but what is the impact of that? So if the parents are paid a fair living wage, then they're able to send their children to school, right? In a lot of these countries, you have to pay to send your kids to school, right? There's no public education like we're so blessed to have here. And if the parents aren't making a fair living wage, then it's very likely that their kids are having to work too, right, to help support the family. So if they're making a good wage, a reasonable wage, they can send the kids to school, and the kids will end up having better employment opportunities than their parents did. So through these fair trade organizations in these third world countries, you're lifting up these families out of poverty. So related to what I just said, I said parents can send their kids to school. The reality is, in most of these countries, if they have any money to send kids to school and they have multiple children, who gets to go to school? The boys. They're going to send the boys to school, and the girls will stay home and work in the house or work in whatever job the parents are working in. So again, this idea of girls going to school is incredibly important, because we know that when women receive education, they lift the whole community up. And it will prevent them from getting married too young, because many times a family that is in poverty, that has a lot of girls, what do they want to do? They want to marry them off so they don't have to support them anymore. Or sadly, they might sell them into sex trafficking, or as happened with our friends here, they allow a family member or a family friend to take their kids somewhere thinking they're doing a good thing for the child, giving them opportunity, and that's not what ends up happening. So education is so key, and the parents being paid a fair living wage is how that can happen. So, what are you looking for, right? How can you help? So, there's a number of different labels that you can actually look for. And sometimes it may just say the word fair trade on it, or even the word I like better, direct trade. So you just have to begin looking, and I'm going to tell you some products you can look for. So the most common products in the U.S. that you can find with a fair trade label are coffee, tea, chocolate, and sugar. And these products here are just examples that I have found in grocery stores that have the fair trade logo on them. And so I just encourage you to begin to look for that. And then for those 4 products. Sometimes you find it on kind of off the wall stuff. So I was real excited when I found my first fair trade wine. So that was great. So you can look, and they've got a great name, Fair Valley, right? And of course, we all know that anything that's labeled fair trade has no calories, so you can eat Ben & Jerry's ice cream, right? And then I found these things that look kind of like Pop-Tarts that are fair trade. And then up there, some cereal. So the things, if you're just starting to do this, I encourage you to look for coffee, tea, chocolate, and sugar. But then you can just start looking at products in general and just kind of see what you find. I mean, sometimes there's olive oil that's fair trade. So different things like that are a little bit random. But looking for the big 4 would be a great start. Oops. Now, what happens when your grocery store does not have any fair trade products? First of all, that's really, really unlikely. I live in Farmville, North Carolina, population 4,800, and we have a Food Lion, a very basic store, right? We're not talking about, Whole Foods or Publix or something, very basic. They have fair trade products. So I'm willing to bet that your grocery store has some. But if they either don't have any or don't have the ones you want, what can you do? You're the customer, right? Ask the manager. Let them know that's something that you're looking for, and explain to them why. So they may be willing to begin to just test it out and see if anybody else will buy it. Other things that you might be able to do to help. October is Fair Trade Month. And so it might be that your class, your church group, your club that you're in would like to emphasize that, maybe do a project, maybe sell some fair trade products during October. One thing that would be really neat to do is to do a campaign like that and encourage people, because Halloween obviously is in October, that if they're going to give away chocolates, to give away fair trade chocolate. Now, you can go online, because most of us aren't going to give away these great big candy bars like Christine has, but you can go online and order smaller types of candy bars that are fair trade. So that would be, a practical thing you could do to help. Another really neat thing that Fair Trade USA does is they have what they call fair trade campaigns. You can have a fair trade town, a fair trade church, a fair trade school, and look there, fair trade universities. So I was looking this up, and we have 3 universities here in North Carolina that are working. It's a process. Like, you start at step 1 and you go through a process to actually get labeled a fair trade university. We have 3 that are in process. And I want to know, Dr. Judy,
Who's my boss?
why is UNC Pembroke not there? When we come back next year, everybody, we'll expect to see UNC Pembroke, right? So, what that involves, whether it's a university or a church or a town, you get a committee together, right? And the first thing is education, always. And then you have to convince the people who, the vendors in your town or at your university to sell fair trade products. So, it is a process. It's not something that happens overnight, but I think it is something that could be fun and worthwhile. Something you might choose to do is to join an organization that is an anti-trafficking group. NC Stop Human Trafficking is. I also mentioned the North Carolina Coalition Against Human Trafficking. So either of those would be great organizations to align yourself with. And if you want to educate yourself, of course, but your friends and colleagues, one way to do that is through social media. Sometimes people feel uncomfortable talking about the subject of human trafficking, but you don't feel as uncomfortable to hit the share button, right? And so other people can learn from you. Fair trade, of course, is not as hard a topic to talk about because you're talking about chocolate, right, and sugar, but likewise, you can share information about that as well. Our team is small but mighty, so there's only 3 of us. And we would be glad to come and speak to other groups that you are a part of, aside from this campus life. The one thing I want to say before I close is that, for those of you that are here in person, we would love for you to come by our table out here and support us by buying something. That'd be great. That's not the end game here, right? What we want you to do is to make a decision to change your buying habits, to make it a part of your daily life. Not everybody's going to start a nonprofit. Not everybody's going to, go on a mission trip and do prevention work in another country or another state here. But anybody can change the coffee they buy. That's something everybody can do. You can take that one small step. So I've enjoyed talking to you, and I hope that you're willing to take that one small step.
So Pam's table is set up right out. Walk out to the right. There's a student volunteer working there. Pam, if you want to join your table too, go out there, please do some of your shopping. You've got Easter coming up. There's great candies on there rather than getting somebody's bunny, which is not fair trade. There's great things that we have on, Pam has brought on her table. She brought a whole car full. So please, don't even hesitate now. If you want to go up and look at the table, please do. And I'll bring on the next speaker in a minute, but Pam's got everything set up for you. Okay, our next speaker is Latiana Appleby. Appleberry, excuse me, I knew I was going to say that wrong. Appleberry. And Latiana is a dedicated advocate, speaker, leader in the fight against human trafficking. And she founded the organization called Survivor Network North Carolina. She empowers survivors by providing peer support, leadership opportunities, and advocacy training. As I said, she is a survivor herself, and she uses her lived experience to drive systemic changes, ensuring that survivor voices are at the forefront of policy reform and service development. As I pointed out during this whole conference, these are our best teachers. We've had 3 today. We are blessed to have all 3 today. We've had some in the past too, but this is where we learn the most. With a deep commitment to trauma-informed advocacy, which I do teach my students about trauma-informed advocacy, she collaborates with organizations nationwide to create survivor-centered solutions and awareness initiatives. She goes by Lala, right? Lala's work is a testament to the resilience, empowerment, and the power of lived experience in driving meaningful change. Lala is a dedicated advocate, speaker, and leader in the fight against human trafficking, and we're so privileged not only have her here, but have her here helping survivors in North Carolina. Please welcome Latiana Appleberry. God bless.
Okay, that's, well, thank you for reading that very long bio. That is not me. Oh, okay.
He has yours.
Okay, good, because I was over here stressing out.
PDF.
Which one?
The PDF.
The one that I can't click, right? Okay. Okay, great. You'll be my clicker. Okay. Good. Well, you know what? I know what the first slide is, so I can start there. Oh, there we go. So thank you, Judy, for reading that very long bio. I am Latiana Appleberry. I go by Lala. And we founded Survivor Network in 2020. And I do want to shout out to our members and people that have sort of started that with me, Hope and Alex. I'm so happy to see them both here. And so with Survivor Network, I am the executive director. I also am a survivor of human trafficking, specifically commercial sexual exploitation when I was about 16, 17 years old. And so next. Can I do the pointer thing with this though? Would that, no? Okay. Oh, okay. Okay, you're my guy. Okay. All right. So today, briefly, I know we only have 20 minutes, so we're going to try to cover a lot in that 20 minutes. We're going to talk about the trajectory of survivorship. It's really helpful to understand that. We're going to go on to what is trafficking recidivism. We're going to talk about what are the needs of survivors at every stage in that trajectory. And then we're going to discuss building survivor leadership, what you can do. Next. Okay, so first, I want to start by telling you what our mission is. So we empower survivors by providing the tools, resources, and the support needed to rebuild their lives, achieve financial and educational goals, and pursue meaningful jobs and careers. We practically address trafficking recidivism, and I'll talk about that in a further slide. But the idea here is when I was a survivor, well, I am a survivor. When I was coming out of my trafficking situation, it continuously happening again was a common theme that I was seeing. I was seeing this in North Carolina. I was seeing this across other states. And so there was a problem. We needed to fix the problem, and Survivor Network was born from that. We believe that every survivor deserves the opportunity to reach their full potential and thrive in their chosen profession. Through a strong, supportive community, we foster connections that inspire healing, growth, and long-term success. Next. All right, so here's this fancy chart. I'm gonna just break it down. So the trajectory of a survivorship is very important to notate this. A lot of organizations work with victims, all right? We do very well there. We have plenty of direct service organizations that help survivors in that first phase. I'm gonna be using these terms interchangeably, survivor and victim. So when they're in this victim stage, right, they're experiencing crisis and exploitation. This is where they're They're very fearful. They're fearful of their situation. They're fearful of coming out of the situation. They're fearful of what their future may hold. There's just lots of fear built up there. They are being exploited, labor exploited, sexually exploited, any types of exploitation. They are in a state of crisis, right? They have lack of control over their lives, over their situation, and all of their needs are unmet. They need housing, they need food, they need medical care, they need stability. None of their needs are being met. That is in the victim and in the crisis stage. But then once you get those needs met, right? Once you feel physically okay, once you are housed, once you have food, you then move on to what the stage we call as survivor. And so some of the needs that some of the experiences that you have in this phase is mental stability, needing mental stability, not having mental stability, physical stability, or financial stability. So that means you need mental health services and others, right? So you're also experiencing a lot of post-traumatic stress, a lot of symptoms. This is where a lot of social workers and therapists come into play. This is why we need you guys. I forgot to say that, I am also a therapist. I have an MSW, a clinical social work. So this is where we come into play. This is a very crucial stage. A lot of organizations will meet survivors in this phase. This is where there's addiction, probably to different things. This is also where they may have insecure housing. So, all right, we got their basic needs met, right? They may be in a shelter, but maybe that shelter, they can't go there every day, or excuse me, they can't go there every night, or they have to be out of that shelter all day long. It's kind of insecure. There's not a place that they feel comfortable to lay their heads long term. But once they meet those needs and that experience is over with, you then move on to this stage which we call leader. And in this phase, you're dealing with healing and independence. This is where a lot of survivors will come to you as professionals, as people in the field, and ask to help. They want to do things, they want to redefine their identity. They're figuring out, who am I? And if their trafficking happened early on, they're probably trying to figure out, who was I? And defining their identity. So redefining, but also defining their identity. They're looking at more independence. They're now figuring out, okay, life has a lot more for me. What can I do with it? There is also a lack of resources. I'm gonna be honest here. When we're in this victim stage, it's easy to spot those needs, right? Because we can see somebody's in crisis. We can see that these are the needs that they have in this moment. But when they're in this leader stage, it's hard for us to see them. They're mainly mental. So it's hard for us to physically see these needs. There's a lack of empathy. And what I mean by that is people will say, well, they look like they're fine. They look like they're doing good. Oh, they've overcome that. They're okay. So there's a lack of empathy and understanding of really about trauma, because that's what it really boils down to, is trauma and post-traumatic trauma. And then imposter syndrome. I don't know about you, Alex and Hope, but when I used to stand up here in front of these stages and talk, I felt like, who am I? I felt like I was here and I was over there talking because I did not feel worthy to be in the room. I did not feel worthy to be teaching anybody about what was going on. I just felt like a shell of a person. And so I kind of made this model in my head I call fake it till you make it. And I live by that. And I teach all of the survivor members to live by that too. And it just means pretend, pretend really well. And then when you pretend really well and enough, you finally are that. You embody that. And so then you make it, right? So you fake it until you make it. Then once you get through that stage, you're now on the Thriver and your advocacy mentorship. So now survivors are stable, right? They're doing well. They're doing okay. They have their housing. They probably have some employment. They probably have their children. Their addiction is probably subsiding. They're doing okay, but they're not thriving, right? They're not producing productive citizens giving back into the community that they were in. And so in this phase, what they're experiencing is a desire to give back. They're wanting, there's a lack of mentorship on both ends, and I'll explain that more in a second. They're missing community and they're missing support. Where are the other survivors? Where are the other people that have experiences? Where are they? I want to connect with them. And then there's a lack of opportunity and there's a lack of finances to flourish and to grow. Okay, so these are our stages. And now the next slide is talking about what is recidivism. In layman's terms, it refers to the cycle in which survivors of human trafficking sex, or labor end up being re-trafficked or exploited again after exiting their trafficking situation. When I was 16, going into 17, I had a trafficker. I was being commercially sexually exploited by a third party. But then once I was saved from that and I got help and I got all of my needs met initially, what happened? I went back into it. But this time I did not have a third party. My self-value told me, you're only good for this. And so I re-trafficked myself, and that is trafficking recidivism. And looking back now, I understand why that was. I didn't have the resources. I didn't have my needs met to be able to thrive or to do better. I didn't have people or mentors to show me the way. And so recidivism was a thing. And it's very often a thing when you're talking about this trajectory. Next, please. So how do we address trafficking recidivism, right? So we're gonna break this down into each of the phases that we talked about earlier, and we're gonna say victim. When you're in this victim stage, you need emergency intervention, right? You need crisis support. We need to get in there, either get them out. Some people use the term rescue. I hate the term rescue. Some people use the term rescue. But I really believe survivors rescue themselves because it's their choice if they want to receive the help or not. Immediate safety, legal aid, medical care, food, shelter, trust, and a familiarity. Somebody that they can connect with. It's not helpful to be a stranger. I will tell you, if you're working with victims and you're working in this phase, identifying something about yourself to make it more personable is always going to be helpful. As a mentor at first, when I used to be mentoring, I always would tell the people that I was serving my story, and I was able to they were able to immediately connect with me, and I could watch their faces and this wall kind of just come down. So we move up this trajectory, right? Now we're at survivor. What do survivor needs in this phase? Transitional housing. Housing that is stable enough, but they know there's a plan to get to their secure housing. Case management, trauma-informed case management is very important. So if you're gonna be doing this work, make sure you get some training on trauma-informed care because you will end up doing more harm than good, and that's not what you intend to do. Mental health support, counseling services, addiction services, make sure that is instilled in them. Make sure that you have those resources that you can provide to them. Addiction and recovery, sorry, I said that. Safety, both real and perceived. So it doesn't matter if you think they're safe, they have to think they're safe. They have to feel they're safe. They have to believe that they're safe. So real and perceived safety. Trauma-informed care, authenticity, and trust. Do not come into this work thinking you're going to be the savior. That is not your job. That's not our job. We're not here to be the savior or to take the accolades or the credit for the work. You need to provide authenticity and build trust. That means being yourself and understanding that you're the passenger of this car. So there's a vehicle you're driving. The survivor is the driver. They're leading the way. They're going to the destination, and you are the passenger. You are there, and you are making sure the radio is at the right frequency. You're making sure the seatbelts are on. You're making sure you're looking up the next stop for food, for lunch, or whatever. So you are just assisting them. You are not the driver. Then we move to the next two phases, and they're really, it's not that they're up more than it is, kind of linear. And let me say this too, actually. This is not linear. Being a victim, survivor, leader, thriver, it happens that way, it can, but you can be in this victim stage, move on to the leader stage, and then go back to victim stage. You can be in the victim stage, move on to the survivor stage, move on to the leader stage, and then go back, revert to the victim stage. This is all what happens with trafficking recidivism. And so I just want to point that out, that this is it's a circular. It doesn't mean it's just upwards. So in the leader phase, what they need is healing and independence, educational resources, job and professional development, training, support, peer support and community, that's a big one. Survivors need to feel who else has experienced this because, I'll speak for myself. When I got out, I was like, I'm not gonna listen to you or you or you or you. You don't know what I've been through. You have no idea. What do you know? And so having a familiarity and someone that I can talk to and having a community and a support system was very helpful. Secure housing, long-term secure housing, life skills, development and more mental health support. That's actually a lifelong thing. I don't think that's probably on every single one of these boxes here. Mental health support, good trauma-informed mental health support. And then you kind of shift over to Thriver. So in this leader phase, let me say this, a lot of survivors are good here, right? A lot of survivors are feeling like, okay, this feels good to me. But then you get survivors who are like, oh my God, no. I did not go through all of that to not be able to speak about it, to not be able to help others and educate others. I went through that for a reason, and now I need to give back. And so they come to us and they say, I want to share my story. That's the first thing survivors will say. And it behooves us to make sure they have the support to do that properly, because if not, they will end up being re-traumatized. We can re-traumatize. So in this stage, in the Thriver stage, this is where they want a two-way peer mentorship. So what this looks like is someone to mentor and someone to mentor them. And it's very important to have both. When I was a mentor, what it did was it gave me this sense of responsibility. Like, oh my God, I got to stay straight. I got to get right. I got to do this because these other little girls are looking up at me and I need to do that. What I got from being mentored was, wow, look at these amazing women. Look what they're doing. I get to be them. It let me know that I get to do that this is available to me as well. So having both are very important. Then you got career coaching and guidance. I can tell you, I didn't know how to write an email at all when I got out of the life. You should have saw my emails. They looked like they were text messages. So I didn't know there was a proper way. There was etiquette. I didn't know that. So making sure there's career coaching and guidance, financial stability and growth. So finance planning is really important to help with saving. A lot of survivors don't have savings account, never have even saved anything. Leadership development, more of that, because they're going to want to share their stories. They're going to want to educate. They're going to want to train, get up on panels and do things like this. And advocacy, make sure that they're wanting advocacy roles and opportunities to showcase what's happened to them and how they've overcome it and how other people can overcome it as well. Higher education and support and professional skills trainings. Next, please. Thank you. So there was the Polaris study. It was the national, Polaris project. It's now Polaris. They did a national study and it surveyed almost 500 survivors, and 69% of the survivors said that they needed a stable living wage employment. I mean, I think a lot of us need that, right? But survivors, 70%, this is why they were going back into those trafficking situations, because 70% of them said, I cannot find a job that's stable. I'm working and working and working, and I feel like I was when I was trafficked. I'm not seeing any outcome from this. I'm working and I still can't pay my bills. 68% of them said that expressed a need for education and job training opportunities. It's like, I don't know how to grow. I don't know how to request more, do more. I don't even have a resume. How do I help with that? 68% needed that. 73% said they needed a community of trusted individuals who can provide support and care. That looks like other survivors. That looks like peer-led organizations, peer-led mentorship, leadership opportunities. And then 60% said that indicated a desire for employment that aligned with their skills and their interests. I think for me, I learned so many skills, and I call them transferable, because when I first got out of the life, I was like, I've done this, this, and this. Now, how do I turn that into a resume point bullet? And someone had to show me how to do that. And so that 60% said that they wanted things that would align with their skills, their unique skills. Okay. Next, please. I'm almost done. I think I'm probably running out of time. So what do? Building survivor leadership. It's very important. It's crucial to the work that we do. Pay survivors, employ survivors, do not tokenize them. What I mean by do not tokenize them is do not ask them to come and teach, speak, train, or anything like that without compensating them. Because everyone in here has a job, right? Everyone watching has a job, and you go to work and you get paid, right? You wouldn't ask a doctor or a nurse or someone to perform a surgery for free, right? So we don't do that to survivors either. That's tokenization. It's also re-exploiting. Offer professional development, support, and mentoring. If you have the capability, Everybody's in here is this, well, a lot of people in here are students. So offer survivors, if like leadership and faculty, something you can do is offer survivors opportunities that you would maybe offer students if that was a possibility. So making sure we're not boxing survivors into this one category of just being, you know, speakers or subject matter experts. There's lots of skill sets that they can have. Include survivors in decision-making processes and in executive leadership. So it's important, the best people that know how to make the work are survivors. So bring them on to make decisions. And then help build a community and refer survivors and open doors. No gatekeeping. We don't do that. We don't gatekeep, right? If you know something that will help a survivor thrive or a subset of survivors thrive, do that. Give back. That's how that will go a long way. Thank you. Next, please. Oh, thank you. Okay. So if you, I think, can you go to one more slide over? Oh, wait. Okay. So connect with us. Here's our website. Our website is, you can also scan these QR codes. I hope they work. Shelby did this. Our website is survivornetworknc.org. We actually, if you want to get involved, if you're an ally or an organization, I have some flyers here that will share more about how you can be involved as an organization or an ally. If you are a survivor and you are looking to get involved and become a member, get some peer support, some professional coaching development, mentoring one-on-one, you can also check out our website. On April 24th, on our website, on April 24th, we have a virtual coffee and tea interest day. So that just means bring your own coffee and bring your own tea and come listen to us talk about all the things that we do and ways that you can get involved because we are opening up our board and our advisory board for survivors to join. So check us out, connect with us. I'll be here for a while. And one more slide, I think there is. Oh yeah, and are there any questions?
Can you just share a little bit of your personal story?
Sure. So I am from Boston, Massachusetts, and I was trafficked when I was about 16. It was commercial sexual exploitation because I was a minor, and it was the tactic. I don't know if you guys went over that, boyfriending. So there are 4 tactics that when we think about trafficking or sex trafficking, excuse me: befriending, coercion, threats, and force. And so for me, it was befriending. Someone pretended to really care about me and love me and use that to manipulate and exploit. And it was the way that I got out was because my mother kind of, actually a friend called. It's such a long story, and I'm sure I don't have the time for it to tell you guys, but my mother found out what was going on through a friend that had told her, and I was so mad at my friend. I was in the hospital. My mom came to the hospital and put this thing called the CHINS, Child in Need of Services, on me, and I was afraid because the threat was you'd go to jail, and I didn't want to go to jail. I had been arrested before. It was not fun. I didn't want to do that again. And so I was like, in my head, I'm going to be okay. I'm going to do good. I'm going to pretend like everything is fine. And then I did pretend, right? Faked it till I made it. But I really made it this time. I didn't pretend too long. And I ended up going to a therapist, and I absolutely hated her, and the second one, and the third one, the fourth, fifth, and the sixth one. Didn't like any of them. And then the seventh one was okay. And I began to trust somebody, and I began to let them in and tell them what was going on and experiences pieces of my trauma. And then eventually it got better. Eventually, years later, it was a healing journey. And so that's the reason why I actually became a therapist, is because I was like, it shouldn't have had to take me 7 therapists to find the right one. What is going on? And so I became a therapist for that very reason. And I've been out of trafficking, out of my situation since I was, oh my gosh, 15, 16 years or something like that. I'm not doing the math right, but it's been a while. And founded this organization in 2020, but I had been doing the work since I was 21. I started with mentoring young girls who were being trafficked, who were victims. I went to program management and development, created curriculums for that particular population, and kind of just maneuvered all through this weave of helping and landed here, giving back in this way. So thank you. That's my short version, very short version.
Okay, so we're going to hear now, we're going to have a virtual Speaker, Christine Long, who is the Executive Director of the North Carolina Human Trafficking Commission. I know some of the students are leaving, so thank you for coming. We really appreciate it. It is my great pleasure to introduce Christine Shaw Long, who has her MSW. She has attended all of our conferences and spoken at several, including the keynote several years ago. In her current role as the Executive Director for the North Carolina Human Trafficking Commission, she strives to improve our statewide response and collaboration to identify and respond to human trafficking. Previously, she served for the Salvation Army for 15 years as its Director of Social Ministries. She oversaw program operations at the Wake County Center of Hope with its 90-bed shelter for women and children who experienced homelessness, a key factor of vulnerability to human trafficking. She opened Project Fight, freeing individuals gripped by human trafficking. Project Fight has responded to hundreds of referrals across North Carolina and is located in 6 cities in our state. She served for 4 years on the North Carolina Human Trafficking Commission and on the Salvation Army's North American Anti-Trafficking Council. In 2017, she won an award, the National Salvation Army's Excellent in Social Work Award, and she received her bachelor's and master's degrees from ECU. Christine will address labor trafficking scenarios here in North Carolina, as well as vulnerabilities that ensnare victims. Please welcome Christine Long.
Thank you all so much. Can you hear me okay?
A little louder, please, Christine.
Okay, I'm going to move closer. Okay, how's this?
Good.
Okay, well, I do want to thank you so much for having me. You actually have already had a terrific group of presenters, and I'm really excited to see so many thrivers presenting before. I hope that that's a trend we see continue across the state at workshops and events in the next year. So wish I could be there in person. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Okay, let's see. Are you seeing it?
Yes.
Okay, so some of what has already been talked about, I'll just quickly touch on, but I did want to talk a little bit about what we see specifically in North Carolina in more of the broad context of what types of industries. So it's super important when you're learning about human trafficking and you're starting to be more aware of things in your community to just have these different thoughts in your head about how trafficking, labor trafficking specifically, might happen in different settings. And so I want to talk about those settings and then talk a little bit about vulnerable populations. And if we have more time, a tiny bit more about cases, some specific cases. So when we look at labor trafficking in North Carolina, this is not a comprehensive list, but I did want to highlight a few different industries that we see this in and how it might happen. We already had a speaker first thing this morning talk about traveling sales or door-to-door sales, domestic services, which we've already touched on some, where it could be, nannies, housekeepers, working for people in people's homes that are being labor trafficked. We also have a number of factories and plants in North Carolina, specifically meat processing plants and factories. So keep that in mind as we go through this. We've seen cases in the restaurant and food service industry, as most other states have as well. And then I know that agricultural and farm work has already been touched on a bit, but we do have a lot of agriculture and farm work across our state that plays into this as well. We've also seen some trafficking in begging and panhandling rings across the state, some different situations that met all the elements of trafficking. And then our massage industry, although a lot of people think of the illicit massage industry as sex trafficking first, I do have a slide about how it can also be and prosecuted as labor trafficking. So, and also we have seen human trafficking in the sports industry in North Carolina, and we have a slide on that coming up as well. So first, just to touch on this, I won't read everything from these slides since some of this has been mentioned already, but we have seen cases related to door-to-door sales. And in the cases that we have seen in North Carolina, they tend to be younger in age, maybe not necessarily minors, but maybe right at the age where they age out of the foster care system. They're especially vulnerable at that state. Typically, they're staying at low or mid-cost motels along the sales routes or neighborhood routes that they're working. And they're picked up and dropped off in neighborhoods to do the work. I will also say that often the, oh, I see a note there. That may be because the air kicks on in here. I'm sorry about that. But often the control is through isolation, and we have seen situations where people are kind of just abandoned. If they need any kind of medical attention or anything comes up, they'll just be dropped off in a shopping center or somewhere, and to just be kind of left there. Okay, so in the illicit massage business industry, just to give you a few different things to look for. These are usually licensed and registered businesses. They'll have, you know, signs up that may be 24/7 massage, or may have blacked out windows in the front. Some things that kind of tip you off that there may be more going on there. But they are licensed as businesses and have, and then what often happens, what we see is that victims that are brought into these businesses do think that they're brought in to do massage, and then when they get to their locations and where they're going, they realize that that is not the situation. They're often presented then with fees they have to pay off of transportation and other type of food and housing, and kind of get caught into these debt traps. We've also seen cases where whatever country they may be from, if they're from another country, they are asked to sign contracts where they believe that their government has told them that this is the work they have to do and that this is part of their duty to their country. So we've seen contracts actually in some of these establishments as well. Okay, let's see. I'm going to try to change my slide. Yes, okay. Now this slide, I do want to give credit to our intern that we have from NC State right now, who has done a very large project on trafficking within the sports industries and trafficking of athletes. And so this was a slide that Drake Gomez created for us. And I will say that we have also seen these situations in North Carolina, particularly with high school aged individuals that were brought from other countries with the promise of soccer or basketball and being on traveling teams while they get an education here. And then often are put in situations where they are not traveling and playing the sports as often as they thought. And they are often asked to do begging, panhandling, or sales related things to help make money that then of course is turned over to the third party. There are also situations where this could apply to colleges as well, and other areas of athletics and sports, all the way up the chain. Okay, and I know that Hope and Alex did a great job talking some about our guest worker program, but in the United States, we do have a guest worker program to help bring in workers and laborers from other countries to help fill where there are shortages, and often that is in the agriculture industry. Guest workers are brought in legally for a certain period of time to be assigned to and do certain types of work. The agricultural side is called H2A. As Hope and Alex Alex mentioned earlier, and I think the morning speaker Christine did as well. We have a large amount of H-2A workers in North Carolina. There's a lot of vulnerabilities here to this. And I will say that when we think of agricultural, these are positions where hands-on is needed. Blueberries, sweet potatoes. We have H-2A workers in the Christmas tree industry as well, and so and then you'll see here H-2B. So these would be workers brought in to do non-agricultural related things. So situations with vulnerable populations and labor trafficking in the construction industry with H-2B workers. It could be the forestry industry, landscaping, those type of the factories that we talked about can use H-2B workers, apply and use those. One thing I did want to point out in a little bit more detail about agriculture in specifically is related to farm labor contractors. So you might think, that the grower is involved or knows what is happening. And often what we see happen is this kind of middle person called a farm labor contractor that's brought in and hired because they speak the language of the workers that are coming, and they're kind of in charge of helping to get everything done that is supposed to be done. They're the ones given the money to pay the workers and different things some of the times. And so some of the exploitation and trafficking that we see happens with this middle layer of farm labor contractors. So, and once again, for trafficking victims that are guest workers or from out of the country, there are the visa options and immigration relief possible. But part of what makes H-2A workers so vulnerable is that their particular visa is tied to the sponsor and grower that brought them over. And so often we see lots of fear for them to speak out and then worry that their guest worker visas are going to be canceled or void, and that can be used against them as well. Often we also see when the farm workers arrive, there's not yet work done. This is an opportunity where a farm labor contractor or others could kind of put them in a debt bondage type situation, and you see them having to pay back for certain things. And all of this is just kind of the ploy that leads into them feeling like they have to follow through with what is being done. Another visa program I wanted to touch on, because we do have a good amount of J-1 visas in North Carolina, and these are particularly based more for work and study, like exchange visitor type programs. We see a lot of these along the coast of North Carolina, and it is another population that is very vulnerable to being exploited and used for labor-related trafficking or sex trafficking. And then when we move into vulnerabilities, this is kind of a little bit of a chart that we like to talk about, because vulnerabilities could be a couple of different things. We call them push-pull factors. So there could be things happening within someone's home and their own environment that kind of pushes them out. Maybe there's abuse in the home, and so they're more likely to try to trust the situation or another person to get them out of that home. And then they can also be pull factors, things that pull someone out, someone that's groomed because they have a desire to fit in or desire to be loved. But a vulnerability is really just that key piece of every trafficking case, what someone else can exploit for their own gain. And so any number of these items on here can be situations for that. And when we look at vulnerabilities, those can also be on many different levels, right? So you have the individual risk factors and those push and pull factors. You have relationship risk factors, community risk factors, and then the larger societal ones that all play into helping make certain populations vulnerable. Marginalized populations are vulnerable. The more vulnerabilities you have, obviously, the more at risk. That's why we talk so much about the foster care system, about the LGBTQ plus community, about homeless services and others. Just those vulnerabilities open up so many more ways. Even being a student at a university is a vulnerability. You know, lots of students struggling pay their bills, make it through college, might be more tempted to respond to a sign on the side of the road that says you can make $3,000 in a week from home or things like that, where they might normally not make that call and take that chance, but because of those vulnerabilities, they might also try that. Another thing I thought it was important to point out is common situations involving substance use. Substances can be used as a tool to both traffic or to keep people within their trafficking situations. We have seen these different cases. Actually, we've seen labor-related cases where someone is forced or coerced or fraudulently convinced to sell drugs or transport drugs. That's not something that they've wanted to do, but whether it's a gang or someone else that has kind of let them into that, we do see labor trafficking that actually involves that transporting of drugs or drug sales. We also see substances used as a way to control victims. If it's not part of the grooming process, then brought in later as a way. We have seen cases where farm labor camps have substances on site, and then of course charge for those or back out payments that's owed to farm workers because of substances. So we've seen those situations as well. And then when we look at cases, I've got just a couple of different ones to highlight. And this first one, actually all of these were in the news. This first one was charged and convicted of human trafficking and has ties to North Carolina. This was a case where this man trafficked students from an elite college in New York, but had ties to North Carolina, and he both labor and sex trafficked his victims, but would bring them to Pinehurst, North Carolina to do labor-related work for him. And so there is, of course, conviction on this one. There's also a documentary out on Hulu about this case that is really, really interesting to watch and learn and see how this happened and how many times actually victims tried to get away and for various reasons were not believed. So this case here was not charged as a human trafficking case, but definitely met all of the elements. This was a situation where a recovery center for substance abuse was actually trafficking those that were living there. They actually had no recovery program at all there, and had their victims working in fast food restaurants and nursing homes, and were collecting all of the funding for that. We're threatening them with going back to jail or their probation and parole being revoked. Of course, once this was discovered, this place is no longer being referred those victims, but this was this was a case in the western part of the state, around the Charlotte area, where a woman was convicted of trafficking another female, holding her in debt bondage. Lots.
We can't hear you.
Theft case against labor contractors in Johnston County. So this was one of those situations where H-2A workers were exploited for labor. Their documents passported or documents held from them, and they were threatened. Very poor working conditions. They were forced to sign paperwork that they did not understand, and is one of the cases that can be looked up as well. So I think might be having internet trouble. So I want to go on to the slide here with contact information. And thank you all so much for having me here. I hope you were able to hear most of the presentation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Christine. Appreciate it. Again, our organization is the North Carolina Human Trafficking Commission. So sadly, the technical difficulties are forcing me to cancel Bill Wolf, who has spoken at every single one of my conferences. And you can just look him up on the internet, Bill Wolf, W-O-O-L-F. He's an amazing, amazing leader in the fight against human trafficking and rescued so many victims when he was a police officer. So we're going to turn now to Joey Hain, who is going to talk about labor trafficking in the United States. She is a Central Oregon native who has worked in counter-trafficking service provision over 3 years. With her background in teaching and intercultural studies, Joey values relationships, intercultural communication, and establishing a foundation of trust. Joey's role as intervention coordinator of 821's Charlotte Freedom Center includes processing intakes and referrals, screening for human trafficking, and training frontline professionals and coordinating the legal support team. Please welcome Joey Hain.
Thank you, Judy. Hi, everyone. My name's Joey Hain. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to speak. And does the little clicker work for me? Correct slideshow. Okay, amazing. So yes, my name is Joey and I am the intervention coordinator for A21 in Charlotte, North Carolina. And A21, looks like my formatting's a little off, but A21 is a global counter-trafficking nonprofit. So we were founded in 2008 in Greece, and we've expanded since then. We currently have programming in 21 countries across 6 continents, and we combat human trafficking through prevention, intervention, and aftercare services. So our programs look different in the different countries that we are in because they are contextualized to the communities that we're serving. So we don't have all 3, prevention, intervention, and aftercare in every country that we're in. But in the United States, we offer direct care and survivor services in Charlotte, North Carolina, and then the Dallas-Fort Worth area of Texas. We have freedom centers in both those locations, which is the center of our aftercare services. So that is what I get to do, is get to work with direct survivor care, and it's a privilege. And I'm really, really excited that today's conference was really focusing on labor trafficking, because that is something that I am very passionate about, and A21 is very passionate about. I think sometimes in the media, human trafficking is a hot button topic, and sex trafficking tends to get a lot of the focus. But as we have seen today through numerous presentations, labor trafficking is a huge problem, and it is very much a problem in our state. And so very happy to get to speak on it and what we see and experience here. So A21 sees human trafficking as a cyclical problem. And so we see that trafficking starts with vulnerabilities. And when those vulnerabilities are exploited, it leads to exploitation, which then can lead to re-victimization, which creates more vulnerabilities, and then the cycle continues. So whether that is a cycle in someone's personal life or whether that is a familial cycle generationally, that is what we see the pattern typically in human trafficking. And we really believe that that cycle can be targeted through what we call our 3-Art approach, which is reach, recover, and restore, which really stands for prevention, intervention, and aftercare. And so what I get to work in mostly is that recover and restore, or intervention and aftercare services part of things. So we've looked at the definition of human trafficking in various presentations, but just noting that that piece of force, fraud, or coercion is needed to prove labor trafficking specifically, which is typically using someone's body for labor services, time, etc. So, as we've seen twice already, I believe, if not 3 times, it's really important to recognize that there is a difference between human trafficking and human smuggling. So although someone can experience both of these situations, it's actually pretty common. That's not always the case, and it doesn't have to be. I think sometimes we, especially in the United States, can have a misconception that all foreign national victims of human trafficking are smuggled into the country and then exploited here. And we've actually found that that is not true. As Christine just laid out for us, the various different kinds of temporary work visas, et cetera, that we have in our country, we actually find that a very large number of individuals that experience labor trafficking in the United States enter the country legally through temporary work visas, student visas, et cetera. And so it's really important to recognize that, as ICE puts very succinctly, human smuggling is a transportation-based issue and trafficking is an exploitation-based issue. And how, as we've come to realize, a lot of individuals are never moved from location to location in their trafficking experience. Some of them are trafficked out of their own homes by family members or close friends, et cetera. And so transition of location is not actually needed for something to constitute as trafficking. They do happen, and there are individuals who experience smuggling and trafficking, but they are very separate crimes. So forced labor. There are a lot of different categories that fall underneath forced labor, which sexual exploitation or sex trafficking would fall underneath the category of forced labor. But a lot of the different areas that we see, both globally and in the US, is debt bondage, which we've seen as a coercive tactic that helps keep people in a trafficking situation, domestic servitude, forced begging, forced military service or child soldiering, forced agricultural and non-agricultural production, online child exploitation, and then forced criminality. And that's one that we are seeing highlighted more and more recently, which is really exciting. We actually don't believe that the data and statistics that we have about human trafficking accurately portray the amount of forced criminality that is taking place globally. For example, where we might see in our communities is young minor boys that are being recruited into gangs that are then coerced or manipulated into committing petty crimes like theft, auto theft, et cetera. And then they're going to juvenile court and they're being faced with those charges, but the gang members or adults that are putting them in that position are not actually facing the consequences for those crimes. We also see forced criminality globally, for example, in the casino scamming centers that are getting a lot of news, a lot of attention in the news recently in like Southeast Asia areas. But forced labor can look like a lot of different things. And we recognize that how someone gets into a trafficking situation typically starts with vulnerabilities. And this list is not exhaustive of the different vulnerabilities that individuals face. But we do recognize that in the majority of trafficking situations, individuals experience a multitude of these vulnerabilities when they are compounded on top of one another, lead someone to be in a place where they can be manipulated and exploited. I'm going to focus a little bit more today on foreign national individuals that experience trafficking here in the United States. That is an area that I have had some experience with and that I feel really passionate about. My office in Charlotte has the immense privilege of being able to offer case management services bilingually in both English and Spanish, as well as in other language with the assistance of a translation line, but we have caseworkers that speak both English and Spanish. And we have found that to meet a very specific need that is oftentimes a gap or a barrier of individuals receiving services. And so with these vulnerability factors that are pretty widely known across the board, we recognize that there's an additional set of vulnerability factors that foreign nationals experience when they are trafficked. And so some of those vulnerability factors can include a lack of a stable work environment in their home country, which makes someone feel the need to travel or find work otherwhere. And so this can also engage with limited knowledge of workers' rights in the US. I think Hope and Alex talked about this a little bit. when someone doesn't know what their workers' rights is, or that they are eligible to certain standards or labor laws, et cetera, when there's no knowledge of that, then they don't know that the situation that they're in is not meeting those standards. And so we also see the vulnerability of pressure to financially support a family, especially if you're coming from a culture where multi-generational living is much more common. We see usually more of a pressure of more people being involved to support the family, or even maybe minors feeling a pressure to financially contribute to the family, which this can contribute to those factors of increasing minor work engagement. You're coming from a community where it's really common for someone to exit school at a certain age and begin working to financially contribute to the family. When they come to another country and that's what's offered to them and that feels normal to them, they don't recognize it maybe as a red flag or an unsafe working situation. We can also see the vulnerabilities of being desensitized to violence or socialized to corruption. If someone is coming from a country that's government is corrupt, or maybe their military, or maybe there's heavy gang involvement, et cetera, when they're coming from a situation that was unsafe to begin with, or there was a lack of trust of people in authority, when they enter another situation that is not a great situation, or maybe not a safe situation, it might seem safer or better than the situation that they were experiencing, which then can cause a barrier of them wanting to report, or even thinking that there's a need to report what they're experiencing, because maybe at least they have semi-stable housing or food, or maybe they're being paid a very minimal amount, even if it's not up to like our standards of a living wage. Maybe it's more than what they could get in the situation that they were coming from. And so that can be a big vulnerability factor. And then of course the language barrier. So when someone's not able to actually speak for themselves, if they're in a country where all the documentation and signage and regular communication is in a language that they don't speak or understand, it can be very easy for them to be manipulated, especially if someone is always traveling with them or speaking for them, or having them sign things that they can't read or understand. They don't know what they're signing, so whatever they're being told, they believe to be true. So that can be a major vulnerability factor. So those vulnerabilities then usually lead to grooming and recruitment. So in labor trafficking, we typically see the most common recruitment methods being false job advertising, right? A job that is advertised as one thing and then it turns out to be something very different, or maybe even the work that they are asked to do when they arrive is different from what was on paper. A promise of a better life, as we have heard today. Usually if a situation seems too good to be true, it probably is, but this promise of a better life is a very, very common recruitment tactic across the board for both adults and for minors. Tricked or sold by a family member. As we have heard today, sometimes there's really hard situations where families feel like there is nothing that they can do and they can't provide for their children, and so they then relinquish control of their children to someone that maybe seems safe or has promised them something, or sometimes it leads to families exploiting their children themselves. False friendships, where a friendship is extended and seems legitimate, but the actual end goal is exploitation. And then debt bondage, where someone enters into a debt, or maybe is told that they have a debt to pay back for maybe a job situation they're entering into, or help with immigration, et cetera. And then that debt is held over their head, and usually with exorbitant interest that you would never actually be able to pay back. So what are some indicators? I pulled this resource from a really awesome resource that A21 has that we call our labor trafficking passport. And right now we have it available in Spanish and Mandarin, and other languages are in the works. But it's a little document that looks like a passport, and so it's folded front and back, and then on the inside it just gives some information of, if you are experiencing this, you may be in an unsafe work situation. And so it's a resource that we have for individuals who maybe are working with vulnerable populations, maybe at border towns or areas that have high migrant workers, et cetera, that can be handed out or given for someone maybe to self-identify. Because as we have have heard multiple times today, a lot of the time it's hard for people that are in a trafficking situation to self-identify. A lot of the times, as I've said today, like it might seem like a safer or more stable opportunity than they had before, even if it is not a good opportunity. So these are just a couple of the indicators that we have highlighted that are pretty common and help someone ask a question to themselves. So it can be helpful for us too to see, like, if we recognize any of these indicators, this could be an unsafe or labor trafficking situation. So some of the common ones are you are offered a job without a clear explanation of its working conditions. Your identification documents are taken away from you. That's one we see really, really common in labor trafficking here in the States, is that passports are confiscated. You have a lot of control over someone if you hold on to their documentation. Your employer offers to pay for your travel, accommodation, and travel documents, which often then turns into a debt that you owe them back. Someone you don't know offers you a job, right? We've probably all received those like text messages that's like, I want to talk to you about this job. Are you interested? And we recognize that usually as some sort of maybe a scam, but if someone's really looking for a job, maybe they've been posting for jobs, et cetera, and then they receive that, it sounds like a really great opportunity. You're forced to sleep and work in the same place, right? That's a big red flag. You are forced to do something that you did not agree to do. You are restricted from speaking with your family or your friends. You are not allowed to take breaks while working, right? If someone is not from this country, they might not understand the labor laws that we have in place that require a certain amount of breaks throughout the day, depending on how many hours that you work. If you have no knowledge of that and you are told that that's not allowed, that might not be a red flag to you. So making sure that people are informed, you should be allowed to take breaks at work. If you are not allowed to go where you want and when you want after you finish your work. So a lot of time we see people that are either not allowed to leave their place of work, or they're always accompanied or watched in some way, whether that's by phone calls or text messages, or especially if there's a language barrier, someone coming with them to speak for them, whether that is at the doctor or at the grocery store, etc. But it's someone that's not able to travel or communicate on their own. If you are not paid, if you are underpaid, or your pay is withheld to pay off a debt, if you do not have any formal legal contract or employment agreement, we see some informal documentation as labor contracts, like maybe through a text message or a WhatsApp message, or maybe a handwritten contract that's not legal or notarized, et cetera. We see these commonly held over people's heads as like, you signed this agreement, but it's not actually a legally binding contract. You are required to pay a recruiting service. Maybe you have a work or student visa, but your school or work violates the terms of your visa. We see this a lot in that those temporary agricultural and non-agricultural H-2A and B visas, where those visas actually require the employer to provide quite a lot of things. Some of those visas require housing or transportation to and from the job site, or work equipment to be provided, et cetera. And we'll see a lot of times in exploitative labor situations that workers are forced to pay for their work equipment or to pay back a debt for their work equipment. Maybe they are not provided suitable housing. It's very unsuitable housing conditions, et cetera. So when those visa terms are not upheld, that is when it becomes an exploitative situation. Or you are treated in an aggressive manner, physically or verbally, right? If it's a threatening situation, that's a big red flag for an unsafe work conditions. So when we are working with victims or survivors of labor trafficking, there are a lot of things that we can keep in mind that can be helpful and actually help us provide the support that we want to. And one of them is having a victim-centered approach, right? A victim-centered approach really prioritizes the needs and the concerns of the victim above everything else. It takes into account their voice and seeks to have them be the one making choices. It seeks to reduce the risk of re-victimization and really empower survivors. And it means acting without judgment and engaging with individuals compassionately. A victim-centered approach typically involves incorporating trauma-informed care. And so if that is something that is a new topic for you or something that you'd like to gain more information about, there are lots of places that offer trainings about a victim-centered approach. A21 has them, lots of other organizations, et cetera. So I would encourage you to seek out that information. But when working with foreign nationals specifically, there are a few things that we can use or incorporate to try to be victim-centered and help make them feel very safe and secure. And so we have learned this over the last multiple years working with survivors from various different cases. The first thing is having appropriate and professional translation, whether this is live or like over the phone. That is a huge barrier that you can break down and establish trust. And so if that is not something that you have the ability to access or the resources to access, et cetera, seeing who else in your community might. Having your documentation in appropriate languages. So having your documentation, if you are a service provider or et cetera, having your documentation translated so someone can read it in their heart language. Instead of having you translate it for them. Avoiding asking unnecessary questions to someone, including about their immigration status. These bullet points are typically what we offer to service providers or law enforcement. And so letting someone know that like you want to connect them to resources or you have questions because something seems unsafe to you, but being very clear that you don't really care what their immigration status is. That's not the point of the conversation. Never allowing another party to translate for someone, even if they seem like a close family member or a friend. So if you are engaging with someone and it seems like a questionable situation and they have someone who's trying to speak for them, really providing the space for them to speak with you one-on-one and be able to speak for themselves, even if that means you have to provide a translator or interpreter, because you never know, even if it seems like a really friendly relationship, what that relationship could be. It could be that that is the person exerting control over them and speaking for them. And so just making sure that we are able to offer space for someone to speak for themselves is a really, really big step in building trust. And then again, creating that space so that each person has a chance to speak individually, because if everyone's together in a situation, you might hear the same story, but creating space for them to have an opportunity to speak one-on-one, you might hear more details that they feel safer to share individually. And then gaining training in cultural value patterns and cultural competency can go a big way. For example, just knowing if you are engaging with potential victims or survivors from an Asian community, and knowing maybe what the animal of this year's Chinese New Year is, or what is your animal of the year you were born, or that wearing white is a color of mourning and can be considered unlucky. Like those kinds of things can really break down barriers and promote trust. And knowing that there is differences in appropriateness of physical contact and eye contact and maybe interacting with people of the opposite gender or spatial awareness and how close you talk or how far away, et cetera. Understanding those cultural differences can be a really big bridge to helping someone feel safe and able to truly share their story with you or engage with services. And so that's something that we really, really encourage. But I think I'm just about out of time. So this is just one thing I wanted to highlight. In North Carolina and South Carolina, these are some gaps and barriers that we see in provision. And this is something that we're really passionate about and areas that we're trying to target in our own services and encourage those around us to also target. So we have a lack of bilingual services, but we have a lot of, as we've mentioned, migrant workers and other workers in these states. And so having services that are accessible in different languages is really important. There are really, really long wait times for certain documentation. I just listed a few here, which means that there's a tremendous amount of support needed from service providers in that waiting period. There's almost a state of limbo where maybe someone's not able to work legally and support themselves. There may be a barrier to getting independent and stable housing if they don't have their documentation yet, et cetera. And so there is different supports and services that are needed for foreign national survivors specifically that are different than domestic survivors and are big gaps that we see in our community, such as housing and accommodation, especially for minors. If they are a foreign national minor that does not speak English, there is very limited housing opportunities here in this state. So that's something that we need to be aware of. There's a lot of communication that's needed and collaboration across entities like law enforcement, legal entities, service providers, counselors, et cetera. There's a lot of cross collaboration that's needed to make sure that all of those gaps and needs are met. Knowledge of individuals' rights and navigating systems. Can they apply for public benefits? Can they apply for healthcare, et cetera? Like what is available to them? They don't know that. And so those are things that we have to figure out and then try to bridge those gaps if there are gaps. And then because of the long timeline in getting documentation and getting stabilized there, there's an increased need of long-term financial support that sometimes agencies just don't have the ability to support, but that's something that we all have to be aware of and see how we can grow to meet that need as a community, because it's definitely a gap and a barrier at this time. But here's my contact information. Thank you so much for letting me come and speak today. It's been a great day, and so I hope that you learned something.
Thank you so much, Joey. Great information. So our last but not least is Jeremy Hunt, who is doing his honors capstone project. And he's an Esther G. Maynor honors student, double majoring in criminal justice and sociology. He's completing his capstone research entitled The Intersectionality of Indigenous Culture and Human Trafficking. And he is very involved as a student. He's senior senator for the Student Government Association, a global ambassador for the Office of Global Engagement, and a member of Alpha chapter of Phi Sigma Nu. And he has 2 poetry readings from a Native American perspective, Where Is She At? And Hidden Labor, both addressing sex trafficking and labor trafficking. Welcome, Jeremy Hunt.
Thank you, Professor. As Professor Paparazzi said, I am Jeremy Hunt, a senior honor student here at the University of North Carolina at Pembroke, double majoring in criminal justice and sociology. I'm also a member of the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina, which is the largest tribe east of the Mississippi River. Before I begin, I would like to thank Professor Paparazzi, the university, and each of you here today for allowing me this opportunity to present these 2 poems. They are creative pieces for my honors capstone project, which is titled The Intersectionality of Indigenous Culture and Human Trafficking. I would also like to thank the amazing presenters before me. I have enjoyed each and every presentation. Native American women constitute a disproportionately high percentage of missing and murdered cases in the U.S. The murder rate among Native women is 10 times higher than that of other demographics, and is the 3rd leading cause of death of this population. This is particularly alarming as Native people only make up 2% of the U.S. overall population. Therefore, I will begin with my poem titled, Where Is She At?, which revolves around the iniquity, resilience, and ongoing fight for justice for missing and murdered Indigenous women. Where is she at? You know they don't care. I know for a fact. I wish I could tell you, oh, how we would know. All we have left is the red blood they made flow. They say not to question God, so do I just lay here and nod? We must unmask the facade, the ones that sit back and leave us outlawed. Her skin was the color of the earth. My heart mourns for the mothers that gave birth. Her joy is lost, but if faith had one thing to say, she said it was worth the cost. A piece of me leaves with every girl gone. They were like the sun, they met their dawn. Soon there will be no more pieces, leaving a cycle that never ceases. Rape and murder since 1492. Protect our girls, this is nothing new. Thousands of unsolved cases, millions of bodies scattered throughout places. When another sister is transformed from a butterfly to an angel, nothing can be more painful. Too many gone too soon. I think of them every time I look at the moon. All of these tribes with no peace as the number of missing girls increase. Their spirits unable to rest with oppressors at their best. Justice freely given to everyone except us, savages. We are the only ones that care to mend these damages. Thank you. Indigenous people are at a higher risk for labor trafficking due to systematic predispositions such as poverty, historical oppression, and a lack of resources stemming from forced removal. These communities often experience higher unemployment rates and economic disparities, rendering them particularly vulnerable to exploitation. It is crucial to recognize, however, that labor trafficking is a global issue that impacts individuals across every demographic. I will now read my poem titled Hidden Labor, which unveils the tragedy of labor trafficking and calls for awareness and collective accountability. Deep in the shadows where provisions fail, a whisper unfolds, too painful to tell. Dreams of gold scattered across every sea, tearful hearts on bended knee. Stressed hands toil from dawn to dusk, sought and traded like elephant tusk. Work, work, with no promises of hope, like ashes blown, no time to cope. In hidden places far and wide, open your eyes, how are your garments dyed? Each day they rise without a flicker of desire, import, export onto the next buyer. Voices silenced, blood still pumping, crowded factories and mass dumping. Ghostly heat surrounds the room. Where is the attention to this doom? Sweat of brow to serve pockets. Chains tight, please someone unlock it. Dusty fields in the dooming sun. Even children, imagine your loved one. Chocolate, coffee, and cobalt metal, crafted by hands that toil and settle. Each bitter sip and sweet delight hides the story of slavery's fright. Yet voices rise, demanding a cease. Prices paid in labor, a hunger for peace. Together we stand, a collective embrace. We shatter the silence and honor each face. For every soul trapped in tremendous plight, forgive us for only seeing the light. Your echoes of anguish calls out to be heard, a great symphony woven with every lost word. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. I'm so proud of you. I'm so happy to work with you too. So thank you all for attending, all of you in the virtual reality out there. Thank you so much for your interest in learning about human trafficking. First, I would like to thank all of my speakers. You were wonderful. You traveled a great distance, Florida, all of Charlotte, as Pam mentioned, someplace in North Carolina, as well as Hope and Alex. Thank you so much for coming, and we learned so much for you. And I hope this inspires all of you to get involved in any way you can, even buying fair trade. And I absolutely encourage you to stop by Pam's table. It's set up in the back. And I would like to also thank my university, especially Chancellor Cummings, Provost Diane Prusank, who spoke at the beginning, Associate Dean Ashley Allen, who couldn't be here today, the chair of our department, Porter Lillis, and his assistant, Ms. Shannon Maynor, who just does everything for us. Robbie Gaddy in the back doing the virtual stuff. There'll be a recording of this. Thank you, Robbie. And Ms. Courtney Powers-Walters, who created our wonderful flyer and our registration. All of you will be sent a certificate of attendance as well as the link to the recording after it's processed. Thank you again for learning more about human trafficking. And finally, I want to thank my student volunteers, Santana, Jodine, and Victoria. Thank you for hanging in there all day. I really appreciate it. Hope to see you next year. God bless. Take care.